Welcome to the enchanting world of Bella Brown's historical Western romance. I'm delighted to share this journey with you today. Before we ride into the story, if you enjoy these narrations, please consider subscribing to this channel. It's a small gesture that makes a big difference, and your support makes it possible to continue bringing these heartfelt tales to listeners everywhere, completely free of charge. Now find yourself a comfortable spot, close your eyes if you wish, and allow your imagination to travel back to the American frontier, where adventure and romance await. This audiobook presentation features The Heartsick Bride by Bella Brown, all rights reserved. Chapter 1, Boston, 1891, Etta. Henrietta, are you out here? Etta sighed. That's Mother. Is it time to leave already? Samuel Dickson's dark eyes twinkled down at her. I guess it wouldn't be prudent for us to hide in the bushes like we used to do as children, Etta giggled. Oh, if only. Life seemed so much easier back then, her mother called out once more. I'd best go before she bursts a button. I'll walk back with you, Sam murmured. His fingers skimmed her bare arm, just below the elbow, where the sleeve material ended. As always, her body seemed to come to life around him, even with such an innocuous touch. She longed to remain in the garden with him, to prolong their precious time together. He allowed the touch to linger just longer than was polite in company, and she looked at him through her lashes, a small smile playing around her mouth. Could he feel it too? I'm not sure when I will see you next, he said, his fingers curving around her elbow before they slid down to her hand, where he linked his fingers through hers. To be touched like this when they were alone was daring, and the excitement shimmered through her. His eyes darted up in the general direction of his parents' house to check that they were still concealed by the shrubbery in the garden. Then he turned the full force of his gaze upon her. Her breath caught in her throat as he regarded her. He cupped her cheek, and she turned into the caress with a purr. His thumb grazed the velvety soft skin there, and he exhaled. I suppose I will have to console myself with a simple touch until we meet again. Etta allowed herself to be carried along with the enchanting words he weaved as her eyes drifted closed. For too long, she had been in love with Samuel Dickson. She wasn't sure when their love had changed from friendship to something more, but for as long as she could remember, Samuel had been a part of her life. His thumb grazed her fuller lower lip, and awareness roared through her, making her eyes pop open. She parted her lips with an inaudible gasp, and she saw the same hunger ripple through his expression. When are we going to tell our parents? You promised it would be soon. Patience, my love, he whispered. I'm not sure my mother could take the shock of her only son declaring marriage when I've only just finished school. She has barely gotten over her snit after Annabelle married a doctor. Etta laughed, because she was supposed to. Mrs. Dickson was certainly a stickler for status, much to the annoyance of Etta's mother and the other members of the church group when they took an occasion to gossip. What about the fact that her daughter is happy with a doctor? Or that her son is in love? Isn't that what matters? Samuel smiled and leaned closer to her. My love for you is for life, Etta. We just have to be patient. Her mother's vocal level elevated to a squawking sound, and it broke the enthrallment he held her in. He straightened up with a wink and stepped back, breaking the contact. Etta felt the distance keenly. Her heart must surely be the size of her chest, as her love for him filled her so. She blindly followed him through the gardens. The ornate patch of grass was bordered by luxurious shrubs, and a tiny white fence weaved its way through, leading a pleasant pathway to wander along. She stepped out of the shade afforded by the oak trees and made her way along the neat lawn, ensuring that she remained behind Samuel, the specified distance he'd insisted that she keep so as not to arouse suspicion. He liked to be careful in that way. Her mother stood on the small porch, a gloved hand shielding her eyes as she tracked her daughter's movements. She heard the deep rumble of Samuel exchange a greeting with Carmel Jones. Her mother looked at him with the same friendly outlook that she always had. Samuel Dickson and Etta had always been inseparable. She had no suspicion that they were harboring anything more than friendship for each other. Etta bade Samuel a goodbye after he'd escorted them through to the front of the sprawling house and into the buggy that was waiting for them at the curb. She kept her eyes averted from him, lest she shouts out her love for him. She nodded along to her mother's inane chatter, only listening with half an ear as she recounted the conversation with Mrs. Dickson. Etta wondered, not for the first time, when it was that Samuel was going to propose. She didn't want to wait one day longer than was necessary to marry him. The drawing room door clicked shut. Elizabeth Rogers held up a finger as they heard the steps of the maid moving away from the door. Then she turned in her seat and pinned Etta with a look. "My mother said that your mother was at the Dickson residence last Tuesday." Her friend's brows wiggled suggestively, which made Etta laugh. "I know that Samuel is home now." Etta carefully arranged her already neat skirt, smoothed out the material as she basked in the knowledge that her best friend was waiting with bated breath to hear of their meeting. She wouldn't let on that he'd caressed her face so carefully. After all, there was only so much that a proper lady could admit to, and having a man who wasn't yet her husband touch her so would be frowned upon, even by someone so open-minded as Betty. "Etta," Betty urged, "come on, out with it." A smile played around the edges of her mouth. He was there. "We managed to sneak a walk into the garden." Betty clapped her hands together with glee. "I knew it. How positively divine. Tell me all the salacious details." Etta lifted a shoulder. "There isn't much to tell." Betty's eyes narrowed a moment before she leaned forward. "Rubbish, Henrietta Jones. That smile tells all. Did you kiss?" Etta gasped in shock. No, though she could feel a rush of heat to her cheeks. Samuel had been in close enough to her that all she had had to do was lean, and she would have finally known what it felt like to have a man's mouth upon her own. It was a fantasy that had occupied many a moment during a boring committee meeting. Betty lifted a brow at the quick and loud denial. Etta moderated her tone. "No, there was no kissing. You know full well that that wouldn't be appropriate." "Oh, who cares about appropriate when it comes to Samuel Dickson? The man is to die for." She picked up the delicate cup and sipped at the fragrant coffee, took a sip. "What isn't to like? He has standing, his family have money." She pointed the cup at her best friend. "Your children will be so cute." Etta allowed herself a smile. They would have beautiful children. She had already picked out their names. "No one knows, and Samuel is quite adamant that we must keep everything quiet and hidden, especially from his family for now." "But why?" Betty's cup clattered as she set it back down. "Your family is of good standing, too. You may not have the money that the Dicksons have, but your father is from one of the original shipping families from Boston. You have this beautiful house, and I'm sure your father would see you are safely established in a decent home with Samuel with some of your grandfather's money. Your father is a respected teacher. Your mother is an active member of the community and the church. You are educated and well presented. I don't see why he is dragging his heels." Etta nodded. Betty wasn't saying anything that she hadn't already both thought and voiced to Samuel. Betty was the only one who knew her secret, and it felt nice to be able to share it with someone out loud. Betty, the eternal Cupid, had taken the news and made it her purpose to get the two of them together. "He just says we must be patient and wait until the time is right. I have to respect that, as much as I want to yell from the rooftops to all who can hear me that I am in love with Samuel Dickson, and that he loves me right back." She gave her best friend a beautiful smile. "It feels good to say it out loud." She pressed her fingertips to her lips and remembered the touch of Samuel's thumb. She held that little nugget to her chest, though. One of these days, he would touch her like that, and she wouldn't have to keep such a secret from her family. She would wear his engagement ring and proudly be seen out in public, escorted by such a wonderful man, instead of stealing moments at the bottom of his mother's garden or when they were alone at parties. She couldn't wait for the day that she would become Mrs. Samuel Dickson. Chapter 2. Etta. Etta and her parents had arrived at the Dicksons with only a few minutes to spare before they would be considered late. Carmel Jones was flustered as she hadn't wanted to appear rude. Mrs. Dickson had dismissed her apologies with a regal hand before she had returned to her other guests in the drawing room. The invite to the small soirée had been last minute, arriving only 3 days ago. When Carmel had mentioned it, Etta had had to control her excitement over the possibility of seeing Samuel again so soon. Disappointment had also been her overriding emotion. If there was a party, there would be no proposal. Etta had worn a navy satin dress with full sleeves that billowed at the shoulder and white silk flower embroidery on the bodice that was cinched at the waist and falling into a full skirt that swept the floor. She'd piled her hair up onto her head, allowing a few of the curls to cascade down at the back and to frame her face. She'd carefully chosen her favorite jewelry to complement the outfit, trying to picture what would make the best impression on Samuel when he saw her. She'd spotted Samuel from across the room as soon as she'd entered the room, where he leaned with one elbow of the ledge of the fireplace, a crystal tumbler in his hand, his expression earnest as he was in deep discussion with Mr. Flanders, a prominent banker who was often at these parties. Samuel stood taller than most, his dark hair curling endearingly just over the edge of his collar. He looked enigmatic, dressed in neat black pants, a waistcoat, and a jacket with a white shirt and tie. Etta followed her parents across the room, declined a glass proffered by one of the passing servants from a silver platter, and settled in for a night of boredom. At least Samuel was at this party, which meant a night of surreptitious glances and furtive smiles from across the table, unless they could engineer a few minutes alone, possibly if they happened to need a natural break at the same time. She would maybe wait for him to leave and follow him out. That way, she could drink her fill of him alone. "Mrs. Jones, how nice to see you," Lavinia Flanders remarked as she turned to see who'd bumped her from behind. "Pardon me, Lavinia, I didn't see you there." Lavinia's laugh could have cut glass. She was the only daughter of the banker talking to Samuel, spoiled, catty, and generally spiteful in her nature. "This is all I need." Etta suppressed the groan. Lavinia seemed to make it her life's job to antagonize Etta at any given opportunity. Their mothers were in the same church, and this meant that they crossed paths often. "I'm not sure how you could miss me, Mrs. Jones." Etta saw the color flood her mother's ruddy cheeks as she looked distraught at having upset an important guest of their host. "Oh, Henrietta, nice of you to join us." Lavinia eyed her. "We all had the feeling that you wouldn't make it. I believe that our dinner was delayed, allowing for the tardiness." There was a carriage blocking the road. It appeared to have lost a wheel. The other woman's eyes glittered malevolently as she looked over Etta's dress. "Your outfit. Do they still make those?" "It's interesting." Lavinia's companion tittered at the insult. Etta was about to give a tart reply when the butler announced that dinner was served. The group filed out of the drawing room and into the grand dining room, chatting as they walked. The walls were adorned with deep red material that had crested patterns in gilded gold on. The windows were from floor to ceiling, the matching red and gold drapes topped with heavy, scalloped pelmets and closed to the late spring evening. The herringbone wooden floor shone warmly in the lights from the wall sconces, the silverware and candelabra on the long dinner table glinting in the light. The servants seated the guests one by one. Etta was sat towards the far end of the table, far away from Samuel. He was a little further down from the head of the table, to the left of his father and opposite his mother. A jealous streak flared inside as she saw Lavinia Flanders settle in next to him. He leaned his head down as she said something, and Etta saw his teeth flash in a laugh that only the two of them seemed to share. Etta took her napkin and placed it across her lap, blinking rapidly to soothe her battered ego. It shouldn't bother her so much. It was only right that the Flanders were seated higher up the table as their social standing dictated. Uniformed staff began to serve the first course, a delicious vermicelli soup, followed by turbot in lobster sauce. Etta spooned only a few morsels up, not really tasting the food. Her mouth was dry, and her gaze was drawn more and more often to the couple at the other end of the table. Samuel hadn't once looked her way. She couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Etta had met the gentleman seated opposite her before, but couldn't recall his name. He tried making small talk with her, but she was struggling to keep up with his words. She caught the look of warning from her mother and ducked her head. It was when the entrees of mutton cutlets had been served that Mr. Dickson tapped the edge of his glass to draw the attention of his guests. Chatter died out immediately as all eyes looked at him. He stood up, used his thumb and forefinger to smooth out his mustache as he cleared his throat. Etta knew that Samuel would make a handsome older man, as he was already the double of his father. They had the same stocky build, the same dark eyes, the same dark hair, though Mr. Dickson's had begun to silver around his temples and behind his ears. "Can you all hear me?" He laughed at the comments that came back that he could hardly be missed. He patted the air good-naturedly, and the group listened attentively. Etta risked a glance at Samuel, who was looking at his father. His expression was calm and relaxed, yet Etta couldn't dispel the frisson of anxiety. She saw the same look of smugness on Lavinia's face. "I am so glad you could all make it this evening. I gather that it wasn't much notice, so for that I apologize. But we wanted to share with you, our dear friends, some very exciting news." Etta saw the look exchanged between Samuel and Lavinia, saw how she nudged him with her elbow, and her heart sank. "I've been reliably informed that my only son has asked the very beautiful Lavinia Flanders to be his wife." Chapter 3. Etta. "And she has done him the great honor of accepting his proposal, therefore uniting our two families." There was a round of delighted gasps and cheers as the news settled over the guests. "Please, won't you be upstanding and join me in drinking a toast to the happy couple?" Etta stared at Samuel, pain searing through her as tears burned the backs of her eyes. She was hauled upright by her father. She turned watery eyes to him, and he passed her a glass as he toasted the happy couple. Bewildered, Etta looked at her glass, confused with what she should do with it. Her ears roared with the blood pounding in them, and she set the glass down as she returned to her seat. She felt the spatter of water on the back of her hands and looked at it bewildered before she realized that she was crying. As the other guests were laughing and offering out congratulations, and their joy bandied around the table, Etta excused herself and fled from the room. She'd been to the Dicksons' home often enough to know where the powder rooms were, and she chose the one furthest away from the dining room, towards the back of the house, where the staff passed by. She was oblivious to the curious looks she drew as she rushed on. She slid into the bathroom, slammed the door, and leaned against it, then tipped her head back and gave in to the tears. Anguish twisted the little amount of food she'd eaten nauseously in her stomach, and she turned to look for the small jug that was set at the foot of the basin in the corner. She swallowed back on the bile and inhaled slowly through her nose. The Dicksons were wealthy enough to have an indoor toilet, and she locked the bathroom door, thankful for the security of it. Etta leaned on the box frame that housed the basin and stared at the reflection in the mirror above. "I am not good enough." The errant thought brought a fresh wave of tears. She'd always known that Mrs. Dickson was the ambitious type, so of course she would encourage a marital match with the Flanders Bank. That would secure the future of their family, more so than marrying the daughter of a school teacher. She had naively believed that love would conquer all. "Etta?" The knock at the door made her breath catch. "Are you in there?" She remained mute, unwilling to have anyone see her in this state of distress. Red-rimmed eyes were a dead giveaway that something was wrong. "Etta, I know you're in there. One of the maids told me." Samuel's voice was laced with amusement. Etta bent for the jug and tipped some water into her hand. The cool liquid was welcome on her hot cheeks as she pressed her fingers to her eyes. "Fine." The wooden door thudded as he leaned against it. "I'll just wait here until you're finished." Etta looked about the room. There wasn't even a window to climb through. She sighed. "Go away, Samuel." "Aha, I got you." Her lips pursed as irritation flashed in her eyes. It's rude to hound someone whilst they're answering the call of nature. "I can't hear you doing anything. Go away. Let me in so I can talk to you. I want to explain." Etta looked at the door and pictured him with his arms folded. She knew he would simply wait it out, but she didn't want to be in such proximity to him that a powder room would bring. She slid back the lock and snatched the door back, so that he almost fell in on her. He righted himself with a laugh that died on his lips as soon as he took in her ravaged expression. She glared at him, her heart singing at the sight of him, even as it broke into 1,000 pieces. He had the good grace to look contrite. Etta, I'm sorry." She shook her head and stalked past him, heading down the back stairs to the kitchen, following the way they'd always slunk out past the staff as children. She had lost count of the number of times they'd sneaked a cake or a cookie from the cook, whilst their parents had been debating current affairs. A myriad of memories flooded through her, a friendship that had spanned her entire life. The reminiscences were like salt in a wound, so that by the time she reached the back garden, her temper snapped from her eyes like a firecracker. Betrayal. That is what she felt most right now. He was meant to be her friend. Above all else, he'd betrayed her trust. "Wait," he reached for her arm. She whipped it out of his grip and whirled on him. The garden was silent. Lighting from the rooms of the house cast their faces into shadow, but there was no mistaking her fury that sparked. "Don't touch me." "Come now," he sighed. "I think you're being a little dramatic." "Really?" She folded her arms as fresh hurt waved over her at his condescending tone. "I'm being dramatic. What was that little show you put on tonight? Whose benefit was that for? Certainly not mine, your oldest friend." Samuel rolled his lips inwards and he looked down. "I know what it must have looked like, but you know how Mama can be. She doesn't need an excuse for a soiree, and this presented itself at the right time. She wanted to announce it before it went in the papers." Etta blinked at him. Was her really that obtuse? To think that she was upset because she'd found out at the same time as everyone else? Her brows knitted together. "I don't care that it was announced at a party. I care that it was announced at all." The last two words were ground out through gritted teeth. "Samuel, not even a week ago you were confessing your love for me. Tonight you're engaged to be married to another woman. That is why I'm upset." He looked back at her, seemingly unfazed. You touched me," she whispered as the shame rolled through her with the memory of their holding hands, of him stroking her face. She'd believed him. In him. "I let you touch me, Etta," he huffed out, a self-deprecating laugh. "If a young man is handed a steak, he's not exactly going to turn it down now, is he? And you were hardly protesting too much when I did take you up on what was being offered to me on a plate." "Samuel," she hissed out, "what is the matter with you? I feel like I don't even know you anymore." "What can I say?" His hands drifted apart as he shrugged. Etta gaped at him. "You can say that it's all been a horrid mistake. You can say that you've been coerced into this against your own free will. You can reassure me that you didn't lead me on and steal my heart, only to stomp it into the ground without a second thought." He simply looked at her, his eyes moving between hers. He remained mute. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you can say that you love me back and that we will be together, that you will speak to your mother and we will run away to be together if that's what it takes, that you don't need the trappings of a fine life as long as you have me. You're my friend, Etta. You will always be my friend. But Lavinia and I make more sense than you and I ever could." She swallowed with an audible click. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep her from crying out in agony as fresh pain hit her. He'd not meant any of his tender words. He'd led her astray. "Why did you say you loved me?" He laughed softly, a self-conscious sound as he scratched his brow with a thumbnail. He shook his head. "You seemed like you were wanting me to say it. I thought it would help." Footsteps on the flagstones from the house sounded as Lavinia stepped into the pool of light from the kitchen window. Even in the dim light, Etta could see how beautiful the other woman was. Etta felt like the moth next to the stunning butterfly. "What are you doing out here?" Lavinia's voice was laced with amusement. "One of the maids told me she'd seen you head this way." Samuel turned, and Lavinia's eyes lit upon Etta. "Oh, I see. Hope I'm not interrupting something?" "No." Samuel shook his head as Lavinia looped her arm through the crook of his elbow and aligned herself next to him. "I see she didn't take the news too well. Everyone noticed her running from the room after your darling papa made the announcement." Although she was talking to Samuel, her eyes didn't move from Etta's face. As her words sunk in, Etta's eyes narrowed. Samuel? Lavinia's honey voice husked out a laugh. I know all about your little child crush on my fiancé, Miss Jones. Everyone has seen how you have always followed him around, fawning over him. If it wasn't so pathetic, it would be funny. Well, Mama and I had a good laugh about it at least. Etta backed away from the pair as humiliation crawled over her skin. She stumbled as her heel caught on a stone, and Lavinia's laughter taunted her. She managed to right herself before she fell, and she hurried around the side of the house, ignoring Samuel calling for her to wait, wanting the ground to swallow her up. Chapter 4. Etta. Etta stood on the periphery of the garden. The wedding day had been perfect. Lavinia's dress looked like it had come straight from the fashion houses of Paris. It was elegant in design, with huge sleeves and a bustle that set off her full bosom and tiny waist, made of silk and lace, with a full train and the same length veil. She looked radiant, with her blonde hair pinned up artfully. A large sapphire winked from a ribbon at her throat, the same deep blue of Samuel's morning coat. He looked very dapper in his gray cashmere striped pants, dark vest, and black top hat. The guests had been escorted via transport back to the grand house that had every available space decorated with jasmine and camellia, the same flowers that the bride wore in her headdress and that had garnished the church. All through the house was the scent of orange blossom, a sign of love. Etta had sat through the church ceremony, wanting to clamp her hands over her ears. Their vows were given with conviction, and she'd had to swallow back on tears. He had used the same tone of assurance when he'd told her he'd loved her. He had used those same hands to touch Etta. He had caressed her cheek the same as he did now to his wife. Etta felt like she was in an endless world of torment that knew no end. Marry in May, rue the day, Betty murmured in over her shoulder. Etta jumped, pulled from her reverie and from staring at the happy couple where they stood on the wide veranda, the picture of happiness. Pardon? Betty turned her about so that she couldn't see them any longer. I said, marry in May, rue the day. Isn't that what the old proverb says? Me, I think marry in September's shine, your living will be rich and fine. Her laughter tinkled at her own wit. When Etta carried on looking at her, Betty sobered. Sorry, I shouldn't be making a joke when you're so miserable. Etta shook her head. It's a happy day. I'm happy for them. She looked down as the lie tripped off her tongue. You should never play poker. You cannot lie for toffee. I'm still amazed you came. I was hardly given the choice, despite my hearty protestations from Mother. Etta had attended the wedding under duress, after many arguments with her parents. When she had finally confessed to her exasperated mother the reason behind her reluctance to attend the social wedding of the year, she was carted off to the dressmakers anyway and told to grow up. She was reminded that Samuel was her oldest friend and that she had an obligation to the family to show her face at such a prestigious invite and not to embarrass the family any further. Her mother was still smarting over her daughter absconding from the dinner party the night the engagement had been announced. What's done is done now. She lifted a shoulder now, resisting the need to look back. Samuel was gone to her. She needed to accept that fact, despite her deep-seated hope that he would, at the last minute, deny Lavinia and her wealth, and instead beg Etta for forgiveness before they disappeared in the night. What will you do? Betty asked her softly. Etta shook her head. Carry on as normal. What else can I do? Has Samuel said anything more? Given more explanation? Etta shook her head. No. That taunting laughter, the stinging mortification that her innocent love for him had been a source of mockery for Lavinia was still fresh, still painful. Etta pushed it down. I don't know that there is anything more to say. He lied to my face. He led me a merry dance. She took a moment to stop the urge to cry once more. It's occurred to me that he's not the man I'd painted him in my head to be. He's not courageous or honorable. No one should be made to feel as humiliated as I did. Improsity rate %. Had he had the mettle to tell me the truth that he didn't ever love me, maybe I would have had respect for him still. Betty nodded, reached for her hand, and squeezed it. Do you still love him? I think I am done with love. Etta couldn't bring herself to lie to her best friend's face after making a speech about courage. She believed that she would always love him, an unrequited love that would consume her very being and make it impossible for her to ever love another. She squeezed Betty's hand and swallowed on the lump of emotion that was lodged in her throat. Your dress is very becoming, Betty. Maybe I should set my sights on finding you a suitor. Where better than at a wedding? Betty cocked a brow. She stepped closer to her friend, her expression earnest as she lowered her voice. Etta, one day, they're going to have children. Their lives, that of your family, and theirs are intertwined. There is no denying this. Are you prepared for that? To have to move in the same circles as them, never knowing the touch of another man. Do you not think that you deserve more? Etta sighed. She was trying to force the tears back as she felt the familiar burning at the back of her eyes. She dabbed at the edge of her eye to try and stem the tears. She glanced around the crowd, suddenly self-conscious. She noticed a few glances her way before people turned back to their conversations. Her brow fell. Betty, she swung her gaze back to her friends. Please tell me truthfully. Are people talking about me, pitying me? After a slight hesitation, Betty bobbed her head. Sorry, Etta, I was trying to warn you. I think everyone here knows that you're in love with the groom. I'm not sure how they found out, Etta could guess. Lavinia had always seemed to enjoy getting a dig in, long before she had claimed Samuel for her own. The whole of society seems to have an opinion. What am I to do? You could leave, Betty suggested, her expression twisting as she shrugged. Move out of Boston, to where no one knows you. Start again someplace new. You could become, oh, what do they call them? She snapped her fingers to jog her memory. Mail-order bride? There's always talk of how women are needed in these towns to become wives to men who are lonely and desperate for a wife. Etta was just about to exclaim her revulsion over being classed as desperate when that husky laugh reached her. A glance over her shoulder told her that Lavinia had made her way across the lawn. She was stood center stage, lapping up the attention. And why shouldn't she? This was her wedding day. It was meant to be the happiest of occasions. Samuel stood, attentive and steadfast, basking in the limelight. Etta looked back at her friend and firmed her lips. Children, a home, a marriage, they were now a couple. Samuel was as good as dead to her. She felt the pang of loss of his friendship almost as much as the ache of her broken heart. She couldn't stand by, with her life in limbo, as his life whizzed past in a carousel of success and happiness. She couldn't spend her life pining for him. It had only been a few months since their engagement. Now they were married. If she ever were to marry another, it wouldn't be for love, but wouldn't their circle forever judge her new man against Samuel Dickson? She squared her shoulders, ignoring Betty's questioning tone as she crossed the neatly manicured lawn, stopping in front of Samuel and Lavinia. The wedding group seemed to quieten as all eyes fell on Etta. Suddenly, she was now the center of attention. The laughter was dancing in Samuel's eyes as he looked at Etta. She peeled back her lips in a smile and gave a nod. The small. I wanted to wish you both much happiness and wealth in your new life together. Huh, like we needed. Lavinia began as she rolled her eyes, but her new husband gripped her hand and shook his head. Thank you, Etta. That's very kind and appreciated. May God bless you with plenty of children to fill your home. Her voice grew husky. Samuel looked like he was about to say something more, but stopped. Lavinia, I don't think I've ever seen a more radiant bride. Thank you. Lavinia's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Etta gave them her most brilliant smile. Heart bruised, ego smarting, she then spun on a heel and with as much poise and grace as her deportment training dictated, she walked away with her head high. Chapter 5. Reese. Uncle Reese? Where do baby cows come from? Reese turned his head, his amber eyes rounded in shock as he looked down at his 5-year-old nephew. The small boy, a carbon copy of his father, gazed up at his uncle, his face open and innocent. The child had hauled himself onto the railing of the fence that corralled some of the steers in, his arms folded over the top rail to winch himself into position. Reese, unnerved by the question, pushed his hat back with his thumb, sucked on his teeth as he pretended to think about the answer. Reese's brown hair was matted to his forehead with sweat, even though the heat of the day had dissipated as the afternoon wore on. Baxter wrinkled his button nose. I've seen the cows be born, so I know where they come from, but how do they get in there? The low rumble of laughter from Reese's left made his lips twitch. Reese looked across where his younger brother was, clearly amused at Reese having had that particular question from a curious mind. Reese cocked a brow at his brother Farley as he replied to Baxter. That one may be for your pa to answer, Bax. Farley raised his hands in surrender. I'm not answering that one. He asked you. Reese scowled at the response, then looked at Baxter. First of all, they're called calves, not baby cows. Baxter blinked innocuously, then nodded with the information. Reese cleared his throat, unsure how much to tell the kid. He wanted him to know the truth, but to preserve that innocence for as long as he could. His gaze moved back over the herd, then beyond, to where more cattle were gathered, over the pastures that were theirs for as far as his eye could see. Baxter needed to know, because one day the Double T Ranch would be his. You see, Bax, we all come from a mama. Every living thing on this earth. And the babies need a papa too? Put it there. That low chuckle rumbled from Farley again. Reese's head whipped round to scowl at his brother. He was about to give off at him when Baxter leaped off the railing and bulleted across the yard. Mama! Reese's boots slid off the bottom railing as both men turned to see Abby, Farley's wife, steering the wagon into the yard. She reined in, slid down, and caught her son in one smooth motion. Not for the first time, Reese admired the aplomb to which she just juggled the tasks of life on the ranch, surrounded by cowboys and ranch hands, without losing her rhythm. Reese followed at a distance as Farley walked across the yard to greet her. It was a simple kiss to her forehead, a rub of her back, an easy touch that was almost a reassurance that she was all right before he began to help her unload supplies from the back. She handed Baxter a candy stick, who whooped with joy as if he'd been given a huge golden nugget and it solved all of his life's problems. Reese watched the small boy skip into the house and felt that familiar pang. He wanted a family. He wanted a wife. He wanted the companionship that his younger brother had with Abby. Was town busy? Reese asked as he accepted the heavy sack that Farley handed him. So, Abby replied. I called by the post office. Pete said that one of the ranch hands over at the Durrell's place made off with a maid from the hotel. Oh, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a letter. He gave me this for you. The letter that plopped into his hand had neatly printed writing on it, marked from Boston. It seemed to be a new reply. Reese felt a little tingle of pleasure as he felt the weight of it. It presented possibilities. He liked that. Thanks, he murmured. Is this another one? Or the same one? Abby planted her hands on her hips. I don't know, Reese replied good-naturedly. I can't see through paper now, can I? Abby let him know her displeasure with a heavy sigh. You don't need to be hunting out a bride like this, Reese. You're a good-looking man, decent, honorable, hard-working. It doesn't seem right that you're conversing with women you don't know from the other side of the country. It seems, I don't know, desperate. There must be a woman more local to us who has caught your eye. Reese shot his brother a look that said, help me out here? But Farley merely grinned at him before hefting another sack onto his shoulder and carrying it to the feed shed. Abby, how many more times can I say it? I've tried the traditional way. I don't have time to woo and romance a lady, in between running this place and keeping a roof over everyone's heads. This makes sense. Besides, none of them have worked out so far, have they? Abby leaned into the front of the wagon and picked up her reticule. Well, good, 'cause I don't need some hoity-toity city girl round here bossing me about on what to do. No one will be bossing you about, Reese replied. You got that right, came the muttered reply. She might be marrying the older brother, but this is my territory. Reese wisely chose to keep his mouth shut as he walked in the opposite direction to his sister-in-law. The argument was a familiar one. Abby had resisted the fact that Reese was placing adverts for a suitable wife for himself. She'd made her opinion perfectly clear from day one. Even when Reese had pointed out that it was partly her fault for being so good for her brother, that he wanted this kind of happiness for himself, she'd huffed and hissed her disapproval about it. Farley had been about as much help as a fish in a trance. His little brother just laughed, patted his wife indulgently on the head, and then left the two of them to it. Reese slid the bag off his shoulder and kneaded along the floor to rest against the wall of the outhouse. He stood with his hands on his hips, his tawny gaze roaming the space beyond the open door. He loved Abby. He really did. His brother had hit the wife jackpot when he met her. The truth was, he'd wanted to settle down for a while, but there was always something that needed his attention. He took in the cattle dotted out on the pastures, the fences that trailed. He could see the horses, their tails flicking lazily in the late afternoon sunshine. It seemed that everyone had someone except him. He'd been lonely for what seemed an age. He wanted someone he could lean on and embrace. He tapped his shirt pocket where he'd set the letter. He contemplated sitting down to read it now, but heard the voices of some of his workers out in the yard. He'd wait until tonight when he could read it alone and see what new delight awaited him. Chapter 6. Reese. Dear Mr. Tanner, I write in response to the advertisement placed in May's edition of the Matrimonial Times. My name is Etta Jones, though I mostly go by Etta to friends and family. I am 22 years old. I have dark brown hair and brown eyes. I suppose one might describe me as pretty, though that feels strange writing that to someone who I've yet to meet. I'm responding to your advertisement because your life on the ranch sounded magnificent. I've never stepped foot out of Boston. You might be wondering why I am looking to find a companion in this unorthodox manner. Truth be told, I didn't envision this for myself, but sometimes the Lord has a path for us, and one must simply trust and believe that this is the one we are meant to be on. I should like to hear more about your life in Montana. I would be happy to receive more correspondence and see if we are to be friends. With blessings, Etta Jones. Reese lay on his back on his bed, one hand behind his head as he read the letter again. A small smile played around his mouth as he tried to picture what Henrietta looked like. She was the first one of the responses to express that she was looking for companionship, not love. He found that more intriguing than anything else. His feet thumped to the floor as he rolled over and sat up. He padded barefoot across the floor to the small writing desk he kept in the corner. Before now, he would ruminate over his reply, craft the letter so that he was selling himself, putting himself in the best light possible. With her casual prose, he felt that he could be more Reese Tanner. Dear Etta, he wrote once he'd said at the desk. Somewhere, a coyote called out, and he cocked an ear to listen towards the open bedroom window. The cool night breeze flowed gently through the room as he pursed his lips in thought. Thank you for your letter. I was most pleased to receive it. I've never seen Boston or anywhere on the East Coast. I hail originally from just outside of Seattle. I followed my folks down here over a decade ago. My father bought the land and expanded the business. These days, it's just my brother, his wife, and their son. Our ranch is called the Double T Ranch. We are a cattle farm, one of the largest in the area. It's hot and dusty this time of year, but I'm writing this at night. It's much cooler and more pleasant at night. I liked what you said about looking for companionship. Tell me something about you. Do you have any kin, any children? I look forward to your reply if you want to, of course. From Reese Tanner. Etta, you cannot be serious. Carmel Jones stared at her daughter as if she'd grown another head. Etta nodded. They were seated in the drawing room of their modest townhouse. I am serious, Mama. No. Her mother set her china cup down with such a clatter, Etta feared for the structural integrity of it. I won't allow it. In fact, I forbid it. Her voice rose to a shrill tone. Etta suppressed a sigh. She knew that breaking the news to her parents would not be well received, and she was well versed in the drama and histrionics of Carmel Jones. Mama? She stretched out a hand along the sofa that they shared, but her mother reared back and tucked her hands into the opposite armpits. Etta pulled her hand back and softened her tone. Mama, I am a grown woman. I am beyond the age of majority. You cannot forbid my decisions. Her mother's nostrils pinched white in vexation. Well, I never did. Of all the things we've done for you, Henrietta, why would you inflict this indignation onto us? What have we done to you that's so wrong? Tears shimmered in her mother's eyes, and it was almost Etta's undoing as guilt flooded her. Nothing, Mama. You and Papa have given me a good life. and Carmel cut off her daughter's explanation as she glared at her husband. He was stood at the fireplace watching the exchange. "George," she shrieked, "aren't you going to do something?" George Jones used his best speaking to a child tone as he crossed the floor and crouched in front of his wife. "Carmel, please. Only dogs can hear you when you get that high. Calm down. Etta's right. She's a grown woman." Carmel snatched her hand back with a pithy comment. "Don't pacify me like I'm one of your students, George." She pushed to her feet, though still fell several inches shorter than her husband. Her hands went wide. "Our only child trekking halfway around the world." Oh, her hands flew to her cheeks as she rounded on Etta. "Oh, the shame. How am I going to face any of our church group? I've heard the stories of the frontier. You could be killed, Etta." "Oh no." She snatched up her hanky and dashed from the room, her inconsolable sobs echoing through the house. As they receded, the ticking of the clock was the only sound in the room. Etta rubbed at the faint headache forming at her temples as she sighed. The sofa dipped as her father sat where her mother had just vacated. Etta lifted her eyes to him. His expression was one of composure. "Sorry, Papa." He scooted along the sofa and shook his head, taking her hand in both of his and patting them. "My darling girl, you know how your mother can get. I will speak to her, don't worry." "I knew that she'd be upset." "Of course. In her own way, it's because she adores you and wants what's best for you. It's unfortunate that those wants don't meet up with your own." He squeezed her hand. "I've seen my vibrant and happy child be quashed, almost erased in the past 3 months. I can see how desperately unhappy you've been since that wedding business. I know that you're heartsick." Tears filled her eyes. She hadn't noticed him watching her to see all of these things. She thought she'd been doing an excellent job of existing, of playing the part and hiding her true feelings in order to get through each day. "I also know that you are brilliant, Etta. You are stronger than you choose to believe. I know that that boy is a fool for letting you go," he added with a harsh whisper. The tears brimmed over the edges and tracked down her cheeks. She had steeled herself for a showdown with her mother, but not the kind and caring words of her father. "Papa," she murmured softly, "I can't stay around here anymore. I can't stand seeing Samuel or hearing his voice. Even hearing people talk about them is like a stone in my shoe. I don't feel like I belong here anymore. It's too much. Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" His lips lifted in a smile, and he brushed a hand over her hair. "You don't know if you don't try, Etta. You keep getting up and you keep trying. Every day. He's a good man." Etta swallowed, and she dropped her gaze. How could she truly know someone she had never met? The answer was she couldn't. She just knew that she had looked forward to his letters, a fondness for him growing with every reply that he sent. And fondness could grow into respect, for she was done with love. Love was inconvenient, painful. Instead of lying, she bobbed her head once. "Well, I know that times are changing. More opportunities are opening up for women every day. You can find work out there to help support yourself." "But Etta," he chucked a thumb under her chin and made her look at him, eyes serious. "If he as much as lays one finger on you in anger, you come right on home. Do you hear me? You write to me, you tell me, and I will send you the ticket to come home. If you are scared ever, you tell me. I did not bring my little girl into this world for her to be some cowboy's punch bag." She laughed through the tears, the dark brown eyes framed by spiky, wet lashes. "Okay, Papa." She threw her arms around him. "Thank you." He held her and rubbed her back. "There will always be a home here for you, Etta. Always. But now, it's time for you to forge your path in life. God willing, it will be one of happiness and health." Chapter 7. Reese. Reese had taken the cart into town early. The frisson of excitement he'd felt when Etta had accepted his proposal of marriage had now bloomed into outright exhilaration. He'd wasted more time than what a grown man should have done planning their lives together. Shared activities, their children, curling up in front of the fire to read, having someone to hold, to cherish. Of course, when he'd been gazing off at the horizon as he'd mooned over these fantasies, and someone had had to repeat their question to bring his meandering mind back to the task, he'd brushed off the teasing comments with a gruff disdain. And of course, Farley had taken great delight in wailing in on his distracted mind and had teased him mercilessly. Their town had grown up around a railhead that had been used primarily for loading up the cattle and transporting stock back east. When Reese had first arrived in Longstone over a decade ago, the town had still been in its infancy. The lawlessness had long ago fizzled out as the community was fortified by respectable settlers. They'd seen to it that the mayhem of rowdy cowpunchers now got their shot of red eye and a spin round the dance floor with a pretty girl in one part of town only. He'd been tempted to bring Etta's letters with him to read as he'd waited, but had thought better of it. Besides, today he was about to meet her in person. The anticipation ramped up as he heard the distant rumble of the train, coupled with the long, low whistle that echoed over the town. Reese hopped down from his seat in the cart and crossed the road. He was about to meet his future wife. Etta. Etta was exhausted. She'd been rocked and buffeted by the train for 4 days straight. Her mind had been a whirring of trepidation, mixed with racking guilt. She'd left her mother crying on the platform in Boston, her hand reaching out in vain towards Etta as the train had puffed and clunked its way from the station. Doubt had plagued her for the entire trip. She'd tried to focus on the stunning scenery that revolved along the wide window she'd sat by. The urban vista had transformed into the eddying countryside. All shades of green were interspersed with huge live oaks, then silver spruce as the train had climbed up the craggy rocks that grew up from the ground, stretching towards the sky. The train puffed little clouds of white as the temperature had dropped. On one side of the carriage, a deep ravine tumbled away to a thin silvery ribbon of a stream far below. But Etta didn't notice any of this glory. Her melancholy had spun into sadness. She'd secretly hoped that Samuel would come and say goodbye. She'd fantasized that he would see her leaving as a huge personal loss and come rushing to her home to bid her farewell. That he would set eyes on her, realize he'd made a huge mistake, and declare undying love for her. Foolish notions. She shook her head angrily to dislodge the musings, but she was a fool in love. She wondered if he even knew that she'd left. She doubted that he'd much care when he had Lavinia on his arm. Her daydream was interrupted when the guard walked through the carriage, announcing the next stop as Longstone, Montana. Etta gulped. She was about to meet the man whom she'd agreed to marry. His proposal had been sweet, offered pragmatically. He'd written that she had been on his mind often, that he'd been unable to concentrate on his working tasks because he was thinking about her, words that she'd longed to hear, just from a different man. Etta collected up her reticule, packed away the book that she'd not touched, and patted her dark hair to check that it was still pinned up, checked that her hat was still perched neatly on top. She'd traveled in a practical two-piece outfit of a pretty blouse with a high lacy neck and a long green skirt that fell to the floor. Her eyes slid to the window. She could see the tops of some of the buildings as the train rattled slowly into town. The first glimpse of her new home. Angst filled her, and she inhaled sharply. Her hand went to the tiny silver cross that hung on a fine silver chain around her neck, and she gripped it in her closed fist as she closed her eyes. Slowly, she let out her breath, drawing a calm feeling from that little symbol that God was watching over her, that he would keep her safe. "Miss?" Her eyes popped open and the guard gave a reassuring smile. She felt the slight blush tint her cheeks. "You asked me to let you know which one was Longstone, so you wouldn't miss it?" "Good. Thank you," Etta replied hastily. "Don't worry too much, ma'am. Longstone is a good town. We have a lot of lovely young ladies who stop off at this station, and almost none of them leave." He left her with a nod, and she watched him make his way down the aisle. His words hadn't delivered the comfort that they'd meant to. She stood up along with the rest of the passengers as the train rocked to a stop and waited her turn to exit the carriage. As she stepped down, she was thrown into a congested platform. People were trying to board as passengers were pushing through towards the exit. Etta was buffeted about as she stood on tiptoe, trying to get her bearings. She needed her trunk. Which way would that be? This place was more chaotic than Boston had been. She pushed to the back edge of the platform, popped out of the mainstream of folks, At least in Boston, there had been clear signage on where to go, where the luggage was. Up ahead, along the platform, she could see cases and trunks being hauled out and dumped onto the side. She edged her way along, keeping an eye for a train guard or a porter to help her. She bent for her trunk and turned, barreling straight into the chest of a man. Blushing, she made an apology as her eyes traveled up, up, up. The words came out more as a wisp of breath as she met the blue gaze that smiled back at her. They were in a deeply tanned face that was all angles and planes, with a strong jaw and a thin, straight nose that had a bump in it from a break at some point. He had dark hair that had been neatly brushed. His dark red chambray shirt had felt as soft as it looked when she'd collided with him. He had a tan belt and dark-colored jeans that had been patched on one knee at some point. When he continued to smile at her, she became aware that she was staring at him unabashedly, but her mind stumbled as it scrambled about for something suitable to say. "Miss Jones?" Yes." Her voice was dry and raspy. His smile deepened and he bobbed his head. "Mighty glad to meet you in person," he said and held out a hand. "I'm Reese Tanner." Wordlessly, she found herself extending hers and shaking his hand. This was to be her husband? "This yours? Here, let me." He reached around her and picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "This way." He tossed over his shoulder. Then she was looking at his retreating back as his long legs ate up the ground away from the train. She had to trot to follow him, her discomfiture at meeting him, her base reaction at being in such proximity to someone so manly had thrown her, and she erupted out onto the street, then had to stop at the side of the road as a wagon trundled its way past her. Etta stared around her. The road was wide, with chuck wagons, lone riders, and nimble buggies making their way through what could only be called a quagmire. Sticky, thick, brown mud. Puddles collected in the divots from the wheels. She could hear the squelch from where she stood. She hitched up her skirts and peered down at her dainty slippers that she'd worn, more for comfort than practicality. Reese was already across the road, heaving her trunk into the back of a small buggy, a heavy-set brown horse dozing in the afternoon mist harnessed up to it. He might as well have been back in Boston. He seemed that far away. The sky was gray and ominous-looking, the mountain mist bringing a bumpy chill to the air. She stepped off the curb, pausing as cold and wet oozed over the top of her shoes. She took another step, having to haul her back foot out of the grabby mud and pray that the shoe came with her. Gingerly, delicately, took another step. Before she knew it, Reese was back next to her, bending to scoop her up into his arms, a deep rumble of laughter in his chest. She gasped, disconcerted by the sudden vulnerability she felt as she was cradled against him. "I should have maybe warned you about the changeable weather here," he replied. His harsh cut mouth was softened by humor. "I could manage," she replied, aware that she was being carried in public by a man she'd just met. She could feel his body against her side, the warmth from his skin as he handed her into the buggy. He tsked as he looked at her ruined slippers poking out from under her skirt. "Sorry, Miss Jones. I can replace them for you. I didn't even think." Etta cleared her throat as he watched her, that small smile on his mouth still. Her nerve endings seemed to zing to awareness, and she felt inexplicably nervous under this scrutiny. She'd spent so much energy in planning her escape, she hadn't paid nearly enough attention to where she would end up. And with who? Chapter 8. Reese. Reese couldn't take his eyes off her. She did look like a deer in the crosshairs of a long rifle, bless her. But if he wasn't the luckiest man on God's green earth. Her gaze moved around her, the sights and sounds of a busy frontier town. The road he was on was lined with buildings made from rough-hewn timber, short, single-story builds that had signage on the front to tell people of the business type. Reese's eyes followed her gaze. "Bit different to Boston, huh?" She gave him a brief smile, but didn't meet his eyes. "It's okay. It looks nice. Bigger than I imagined. It's grown considerably since I came down here. My folks were here when it was just a railhead stop. They were amongst the first of the homesteaders in the area." He caught her look of trepidation and wanted to soothe her worries. "There's pretty much anything you need to buy here. That's the general store." He moved closer to her as he pointed. He didn't miss when she leaned back and tried not to feel disappointed. We have a textile shop, a theater that doubles as a dance hall, a fair few saloons, a drugstore. We have a doctor from Philadelphia. Talk is he's going to build an infirmary. That'll really set Longstone on the map. It's all very nice, she murmured. His gaze took her in for a moment, and she met him briefly before it dropped to her hands that she'd knotted together in her lap. It's okay, he said. I'm nervous, too. She did meet his gaze then. Oh, I didn't mean to cause offense. None was taken. You're also a lot prettier in real life than you said in your letters. The rosy blush that spilled over her cheeks was becoming. She clearly wasn't used to receiving compliments as she didn't look comfortable. Thank you. She touched a hand self-consciously to her hair. You weren't what I was expecting either. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. He grinned easily. Shove up. He waved her along the bench of the buggy and pulled himself up next to her. The buggy rocked with his weight and the horse alerted, the harness tinkling as Reese collected the reins and gave a flick of his wrist. Etta's hand shot out to steady herself, and her fingers brushed his thigh. She snatched her hand back and shimmied further away from him. He ignored the gesture, not wanting to make her edgy disposition more pronounced by commenting on it. How was your journey? Oh, she pulled her gaze from the town, the folks, the quaint squat buildings. Quite okay, thank you, though tiring. More so than I expected it. I suspect I shall be feeling that train movement for quite some time. He guided the buggy into 2nd Street, heading out of town. See? He lifted his chin, and she followed the direction. That's the church we'll get married in. Isn't it something? Her expression dropped as she stared at the pale gray build, topped with the cross and surrounded by a tiny white picket fence. Beyond it, fields rolled away, disappearing into the low-lying cloud. It's quite lovely, she murmured. Her response was anticlimactic. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she didn't like the look of him. Maybe she had a secret that she needed to tell him. He'd heard of it, where mail-order brides turned up, having fled bad situations, where they already had a baby on the way. The hectic sound of the township began to fade out, and soon the only sound was the sizzle of the wheels as they rolled along the muddy lane and the soft clop of hooves. Reese turned in his seat and checked over his shoulder before he reined the horse over to the side of the road and stopped. Etta kept her gaze on the horizon, clearly her mind elsewhere. Terre descent. Reese turned in the seat to look at her, had to touch her arm to bring her out of the daydream. Brown eyes met blue. I think we need to go into this with our eyes and our minds open, he said. Her brows met as he continued. I have no intention of holding a woman here against her will. I am aware that we cannot just fall madly in love, that we may never fall in love. But from your letters, I had the feeling that you were willing to try. You spoke of companionship, of having someone to support and to care for you, and vice versa. If there is something that you need to tell me, I ask that you're honest with me now. Whatever it is, I can deal with it, as long as I know what it is. What do you mean? Are you a criminal? She gasped, her mouth making an O with the sound. No. Are you with child? Her hand pressed to her chest. No, Mr. Tanner, I am most certainly not. Indignation now sparked color into her cheeks. I cannot believe you would even suggest. He raised his hands up. I'm just asking a question. And please, call me Reese. Only the bank manager calls me Mr. She settled herself, her movements jerky. She shook her head on a sigh, and her irritation deepened as he laughed once more. I don't find this funny, Mr. Reese. I just want you to be honest, Etta. I meant what I said in my letters. I want a wife, and I want a family. That's why I did this. He lifted his hands in a shrug. I get the feeling that maybe you're not that keen on the idea now. Etta moistened her lips, her gaze moving from his face to her hands as she fidgeted. I'm just a little overwhelmed is all. The journey took more out of me than I thought. It's a big change, she added, her voice thick. Okay, he nodded. Just know that if there's anything you need to tell me, I'm here. Ears open. She bobbed her head once and looked stubbornly ahead. Then she sighed. I'm freezing. It's August. For goodness sake, I thought my outfit would be perfectly sufficient. Why is it like this? My feet, they're like frozen blocks. That mud is cold. His teeth flashed white in a grin. He stretched one arm back and retrieved a blanket from the box behind them. He unfolded it and then wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling the ends to under her chin. "We'll get you some decent boots, Etta," he murmured as he ducked his head to her. "You'll get used to life when you live near mountains. One day, it can be high sunshine, the next we have snow falling." He collected the reins back up and clicked his tongue. Etta. Etta snuggled deeper into the heavy wool blanket and felt the chill ease from her. With it, her shoulders relaxed as the warmth seeped through her body. Admitting to being cold had been a partial truth and a way to get him off the subject of why she was behaving the way she was towards him. He was exactly the way he'd come across in his letters to her. Friendly, affable, honest. He was looking for a companion and hoped that it developed into something more. He'd been the tonic that her bruised heart had needed at the time. But her heart kept making associations. Samuel's eyes were a brighter blue. Samuel was taller than Reese, but not as stocky. Samuel had pale, smooth hands. Reese's hands were tanned, and the skin had been rougher when he'd touched her earlier. Disconcertingly, Reese seemed to have more of an impact on her center than he should, and she felt almost as if she was betraying Samuel, which was just absurd. Comparisons are odious. Her mother's voice popped into her mind. She'd come here to escape heartache. Why wouldn't her body cooperate with the new plan? Reese was trying to make her feel welcome. She was still recovering from being carried across the road. He'd made her feel so tiny and so precious all in one go. If she wanted to, she could recollect how his body had felt next to hers. She shook herself to stop the image before it could take shape. "Won't be long and you'll be by the fire." He mistook her movement for a shiver. "The blanket is helping, thank you," she told him. Fine droplets of moisture beaded on the blanket, though none seeped through. The mist seemed to roll and ebb around them. It was difficult to see as the horizon swirled, giving a brief glimpse of gray mountains and mysterious trees that were swallowed up just as quickly as they appeared. The road was like a brown ribbon that rolled out into the haze. "Were your folks okay about you coming out here?" Etta pictured the crying jag she'd left her mother in at the railway's edge in Boston. "My father was okay about it. My mother, it'll take some getting used to for her. We're a tight family here. My parents passed away not long after Baxter was born. The winter flu was pretty bad that year in the area. Abby and Farley, we all lived together in the big house, as I said. Baxter is a hoot. We have an easy rhythm together. But once we're married, we might have to rethink that. I don't want to upset the union of you all." He angled her a look and smiled. "You don't want to be alone with your husband?" Etta blushed, and he laughed. "I'm just kidding you, Etta. We'll see what works, what doesn't. It's like I said, we have to have good communication, see where we fit together. And if we don't, what then?" She pushed the thought away and swallowed as the cart turned right in through an arch. The lane was lined with simple railings, and Etta could make out dark shapes in the mist, hear the lowing of cattle as they rode under a frame that declared the Double T Ranch. Her anxiety racked up a notch as the buildings emerged through the fog. Rambling wooden-framed buildings that were dotted haphazardly around with no apparent rhyme nor reason to their purpose. She could see heavy-looking machinery and a wagon discarded in the yard. The smell of animals was quite potent, and she tucked her nose into the blanket to try and filter the scent out. She could see the house beyond the sheds. A sprawling two-story affair in dark wood with a curl of smoke from the chimney. It had a small porch that disappeared around the side with chairs under it. She pictured the lovely brick edifice of her parents' house. Indoor plumbing, a landscaped garden in an orderly avenue that was lined with trees, a solid roof. This home looked like a strong wind would demolish it in one go. "Welcome to Double T," Reese announced as the cart pulled up in the yard. Etta tried to school her face into an expression that showed she was impressed, instead of the utter dread she was feeling. Chapter 9. Etta. The front door was thrown open, and a miniature Reese came bulleting out of the door, a battle cry erupting from his considerable lungs as he flung himself down the steps and across the yard. Reese hopped down and caught the youngster mid-flight, spinning him around before bringing him to rest on his hip. "Slow down," he said, before you put your teeth out of your head." The child was staring at Etta with open curiosity. "Is that your wife?" "Not yet," Reese replied, "but I'm hoping she will be in a few days." Baxter considered her a few moments before he stuck his closed fist towards Etta, out of which protruded a couple of limp wildflowers that had seen better days. "Here you go. Pa says girls always like flowers." Etta, charmed by him, dropped the blanket and accepted his gift, showing her first genuine smile. "Thank you, Master Tanner." Baxter wrinkled his nose as he looked gleefully at his uncle. "She called me master," he giggled. "Well, you are a master. Baxter, this is Etta Jones. Etta, this is my nephew, Baxter." "Pleased to meet you." Baxter wriggled and was set on his feet, then immediately starting to bounce on the spot as he chattered to no one in particular about a heifer who had got her legs stuck, and two of the ranch hands had gone to get the animal back on the right side of the fence. Reese held out a hand, giving Etta a knowing smile as he helped her down. "He is like a runaway horse," he murmured an apology. "He can talk the hind leg off from anything. I adore him." Etta stepped down to the ground, which was less muddy than the road in the town, as gooseflesh raced over her skin. "It's fine," she replied huskily. "He has much energy to burn off, I imagine." Reese indicated that he would follow her, and Etta headed in that direction. As Reese explained to her about the house, its rooms, which window was what, Etta saw a woman hovering in the doorway and automatically smiled, but the other woman just turned away from the open space and walked back into the house. The house was deceptively charming and smelled of zest and wood smoke as she stepped in. It had a sofa covered in quiet blues and greens, with a laced blanket at the back. Other patchwork dotted about the room in homely colors. The flooring was gleaming, and a fire simmered in a stone hearth, giving the room a welcome feeling. The long table demarcated the space between the living and the cooking area. The drapes framed the windows. There was a wide, comfortable chair nestled in a small nook next to a wide window. An open book sat on the small table next to it. Wooden, colorful toys were scattered on the thick rug in front of the hearth. The room looked lived in. "Here we are," Reese said as he closed the door behind her. "Fire lit as promised. Come, sit by the fire and warm yourself." He motioned for her to sit. "Abby, come meet Etta," he called out. The woman who'd been in shadow at the door stepped around the corner out of the kitchen area. Whereas Reese's expression had been open and welcoming, Abby's was pinched with distaste. She wiped her hands on a towel as she stood stiffly across the room. The other woman was slight, with pale blonde hair and brown eyes and rose-kissed skin. "Hello," Etta said. "You have a lovely home." The other woman nodded and bobbed her head. "It's a family home," came the curt reply. "Would you like something to drink?" Reese offered. "Actually," Etta said, "I'd like to change into some warmer clothes. Get out of these wet shoes, though I'm not sure I have anything yet that will suffice." "She has ruined her lovely shoes, Abby. Do you have anything that she could borrow until we can get some ordered?" A dark scowl crossed his sister-in-law's face. "Prosody. I don't run a mercantile store, Reese. My boots are expensive." She turned back into the kitchen and muttered something about city folks. He held up a hand, shot Etta an awkward smile. "We'll find you something. Let me show you to your room. Just wait there whilst I go and fetch your trunk." He returned a few minutes later, relieving Etta of the uncomfortable silence that filled the room as Abby remained by the cooker. She followed him through the house, which was larger than it first appeared, down a series of passages and round corners, until he came to a stop next to a door. He set the trunk down, pushed open the door, and stepped back to allow her to enter. The room was simple yet pretty. A riot of yellow filled the room, with matching bedspread and drapes. There was a pedestal sink in one corner and a large jug that had tiny yellow flowers on it set on the floor. A small chest of drawers and a single wardrobe sat along the opposite wall. The room had a small wooden-framed bed set opposite the window. "We thought you might want to have a room of your own, least until we're married," Reese said, looking about the room. "It's quite lovely," she said, grateful that he was giving her some time and space to acclimatize. "Where's your room?" "Over the other side." He clasped his hands as he explained. "There's a pot under the bed if you need to go." You know?" Etta nodded, tongue-tied. She cleared her throat. I get the feeling that your sister-in-law doesn't like me? Reese set his hands on his hips, lifted a shoulder. Abby? She's great. Etta suppressed a sigh, but remained quiet. My sister-in-law was wondering what made you decide to come out here in the first place, he commented after a beat. Is that what made you think I had something to hide? He had the good grace to look ashamed. Partly, he admitted. I think she will be a bit like your ma. It's going to take some getting used to. She and my brother have been married for 6 years. Their son Baxter is just a hoot. I think Abby is a bit worried that you'll take over when she's been in charge of us for so long. It'll work out, I'm sure. I'll let you get settled in. He backed towards the door. Can I bring you some refreshments up? Something to eat? She remembered the city girl comment. I'll come down, she said. Just give me a little time to freshen up, wash off the train. He smiled, hovered in the doorway, rocked from one foot to the other. I'm glad you came, Etta. Etta returned a smile that she was far from feeling. Let it drop as the door closed into the frame. She sat on the bed, toed off her ruined slippers, unhooked her stockings, and peeled them down. Her feet were icy and damp, and she curled her toes into the rug underfoot. She lay back on the bed and dragged a hand down her face. She couldn't shake the heavy feeling that compressed her chest. A feeling of dread, a disquiet that gripped her insides. She was so far from Boston, from everything that was familiar. Yes, she'd escaped from hearing about Samuel, from the possibility of seeing him with Lavinia and having that shaft of pain lance through her. But she had also given up her home comforts, her friends, her family. Tears stung her eyes, spilled over the edges, and ran down her temples into her hair. She heaved in a sigh as she realized she'd made a terrible mistake in coming here. Chapter 10. Etta. Reese had been right. Etta had woken the next morning just as dawn flirted with the night, chasing it back with her pinks and rose hues. Watching the dark shadows of the buildings and beyond transform to greens and browns and blues had been mesmerizing. She dressed in a practical green shirt and skirt and wound her dark hair up out of the way, stopping by the window as she got herself leisurely ready for the day, to wonder at how different the landscape looked without the morbid shrouding of fog. Pastures of land stretched on. The shades of green and yellow were dotted with cattle, sheep, horses, crisscrossed by fencing to the fuzzy tree line that rushed up into blue-gray of the mountains. She could see their craggy tops streaked with white, where they reached towards the heavens, into a stunning blue sky that had the occasional cloud dotted in the endless splendor. Instead of paved roads and neat carriages, she saw several of the ranch hands saddling up, their cheerful chatter muffled from this distance. She saw practical sheds and stables instead of neatly lined urban life. She saw different to her familiar and felt a pang of loneliness. She touched a palm to the chilled window, the heat of her hand causing a bloom of haze on the glass. She pulled her hand away, watched as it evaporated again. She pushed away thoughts of Samuel and sighed, telling herself that there was nothing left for her in Boston. This was to be her life from now on. She might as well start living it. She made her way downstairs, the scent of coffee reaching her before her foot left the last tread. She could hear the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Baxter had his toys set out in the middle of the floor, but he was sat at the table with a man. He glanced up as Etta moved into view. His eyes danced as they took in her appearance, and his face split for a welcoming grin as he pushed to his feet. Good morning, he nodded, rounding the edge of the table with his hand outstretched. Etta knew without him having to introduce himself that this was Farley, Reese's younger brother. They had the same coloring, dark hair and dancing eyes, though he was finer build than Reese. Welcome, welcome. Did you sleep well? Very, she replied, as she accepted the chair that he held out for her. I think the traveling caught up with me. Reese said you'd retired early. Sorry I missed you yesterday. That's right. Something about an animal stuck? Farley sat, but Baxter answered for him. Had to shoot it. Stupid thing. Etta blinked in surprise at his bluntness, which drew a laugh from Farley. Forgive my son. I can see that you're not used to such speak around the breakfast table, but alas, yes, the animal was beyond help. It had broken its leg after falling down a hole, and so it was easier to end its suffering. Baxter speared up a piece of dried beef with his fork and waggled it at her. Good eating, though. Then he popped it in his mouth and smiled at Etta. Farley chuckled once more. It's not that particular cow, though we do slaughter and eat our stock. Are you hungry? Abby appeared at the side of the table and slid a plate in front of Farley. I'm sure she's capable of plating herself something up, Farley, as I know I'm far too busy to be waiting on another person today. Farley sent Etta a look, but any comment was cut off as Reese opened the back door. He spotted Etta as he removed his hat, and his smile deepened so that a dimple winked in his cheek. He hung his hat upon the hook next to the door and crossed to the table, taking up the seat next to hers. Just when I thought this day couldn't get any more beautiful, he murmured, his eyes roaming her face so that she blushed. How did you sleep? Abby harumphed in the kitchen. In her bed, with her eyes closed. I've no doubt. None of you are so concerned with how I slept. Oh, Abby. Reese stood to pour 2 cups of coffee and returned to the table with them, passed one to Etta. You know we love you too. I'm only being polite to my future wife. Etta's blush deepened as a frisson of guilt washed over her. The conviction of his feelings was disconcerting, almost as if she were waiting for him to admit that it was all a ruse. I slept well, thank you. I think the combination of fresh air and traveling caught up with me. I'm sure you'll need a few days to acclimatize, he sipped at the fragrant brew, settle in. I'd quite like to go into town, pick up some supplies, some new boots, she added. Oh, sure, I'm going to be a little tied up today to come with you. We had to euthanize an animal yesterday and need to go and try to prevent it happening again by either bringing the fence line back or something. These animals are too valuable to keep having them drop off cliffs. I could free up some time tomorrow? Abby could take her? Farley suggested, and missed the dirty look his wife shot him as he spooned up more of his oatmeal. She won't mind. Etta caught the look, heard the cabinet door slam back into place. I wouldn't want to be any trouble. Nonsense. Reese patted her hand and straightened as he looked at his sister-in-law. You were planning on going into town anyway, weren't you, Abby? Not really, came the muttered reply. Reese ignored her. Do you need some money? I have some cash here if you need it. I'd like to make sure you get all you need. Abby barked out a sound of disbelief. Etta's irritation sparked into life inside. She watched the other woman, her movements jerky with annoyance as she moved about the kitchen, slamming pans onto the stovetop and throwing a towel onto the worktop, and wondered what the cause of her obvious dislike to Etta was. She pondered for a moment and made a mental note to ask her when she was alone. Etta was used to being treated as an irritant, as someone in the way. Hadn't Lavinia always been unkind to her? When she compared the two women, Abby was a pussycat compared to Lavinia's spiteful nature. Etta pulled her lips back in a stiff smile. I have my own money, Reese, but thank you for the offer. I'm not hungry, so if you don't mind, I'll go finish unpacking. She pushed her coffee cup away untouched and stood. Paused. Maybe we could go into town tomorrow. She held Abby's gaze for a moment before she looked to Reese. Etta wasn't going to roll over and be a verbal punch bag for another woman. We need to meet the pastor and maybe set the wedding date. Reese's grin could have lit up the room at midnight. We can definitely do that. Etta. Dear Mama and Papa, I thought I would write to you so that you would know I arrived safely yesterday. It took 4 days to reach here, and Mr. Tanner met the train as promised. Mama, you will hopefully be eased to know that I wasn't overcome by any ruffians or the train wasn't robbed. The journey went well, though it was tiring. It was lovely to see our magnificent country, though I couldn't recall some of the names of the places I stopped at to eat. I met lots of lovely people who seemed in good nature to be going on an adventure of their own. I have enclosed the address of the ranch, so you may reply to me. Today, Mr. Tanner. He insists I call him Reese, which is strange, seeing as we only just met, and by the very nature of our arrangement, we are still strangers. And I went to Longstone Town and met the pastor. We are to be married in 4 days. The church is very pretty and has flowers around the edge of the garden that it sat in. In fact, the whole town is very appealing. It has everything one might need to buy without visiting a big city. though it doesn't have the frenetic energy of Boston. It's taking some getting used to. The family is very welcoming and kind, as are the townsfolk. The Tanner family were one of the original settling families to the area, and as such are well respected, as well as being trusted employers to many in the area. I am still to find out what my duties and chores might entail here at the ranch. There is a local school, Papa, that has a lovely teacher. I might hope to be finding a job in the area should being a housewife be too much. I fear the sister-in-law to Reese is resentful of another hen in the house, so to speak. I hope that with time, she will at least be tolerant. I'm writing this so that you may know I am safe and well here on the frontier. It's so very beautiful here in the mountains, though the weather was most certainly unexpected, and I have had to invest in some new wardrobe already. Please say hello to our friends. I pray that you are kept safe and well, and that the Lord smiles down on you with blessings every day. Your daughter, the adventurer. Etta. Reese. For more times than he could count, he'd been distracted by thoughts of Etta, of marrying Etta, of hearing her voice, of waking up with her, of being able to hold her. He rode alongside Farley and Bill as the day drew to a close. They'd been out most of the day, and the others had ribbed him because he'd been so out of sorts. They'd teased him about the wedding night, about the driving need he seemed to have for a wife, when other men ran from the thought of having the baggage that a wife could bring. He'd laughed along jovially because that was what was expected of him, but deep down, he was distracted by the thought that she wasn't that into this arrangement. It was the same feeling he'd had when she'd arrived in Longstone. Sure, she'd suggested the visit to the pastor. She had replied to his questions about her life, her likes, her needs, but she was yet to ask her own questions back. The more the days passed, the more he got the feeling that she was just going along with the ruse to placate him, to ease Abby's constant sniping, or worse, because that's what was expected of her. He sensed that she was holding back on him. Even the rush of pleasure he'd gotten after she'd suggested he take her to town had fizzled out when she'd been answering the questions by rote. Reese narrowed his eyes as the spread of double T came into view when they rounded the top of the hill and began the descent into the bowl of the valley where the ranch lay. He loved this place. His parents had poured their souls into building it so that he and Farley may have a future that he wanted to share with Etta. I don't even think he's home right now, Farley said, and leaned back over his mare's back to snap his fingers in his brother's direction. Hey! Reese slid his gaze at his brother. I hear you. Can't anybody miss your foghorn voice? The group laughed. If you can get your mind out of the bedroom for 5 minutes, Bill said he'll move those 5 steers from the shed into the back paddock for us before he leaves. Reese smiled. I was actually thinking about Ma and Pa, about how they built this place for us, he reined in, taking a moment as the ranch hands continued on. Farley halted too, leaning on the pommel to stare out across the expanse of land. I couldn't picture my life anywhere but here, he commented. The most beautiful place on earth, that's for sure, Farley replied dreamily. I can't imagine what it must take to relocate somewhere new. Farley turned back to look at his brother, at his melancholic tone. What's on your mind, Reese? His lips thinned as he contemplated his answer. All kidding aside, do you think she's done the right thing in coming here? Farley watched him quietly. I get the feeling that she's not truly happy. Not as happy as I am over the prospect. It's been a few days now. I thought that she might change her mind, settle in. I wonder if she thinks that she's made a mistake? Farley's ride shuffled back at the guide from his reins and placed heels in his sides until Farley was next to his brother. It's a big change for her. And, as Abby said, we don't know her. Not really. We don't know what she's left behind, other than what she's told us. Reese stared at his brother. I asked her if she was hiding anything. She said no. His brother shrugged. There you go, then. It might just be taking longer. Give her some more time. Whilst we're on the subject, I need you to speak to Abby. Farley rolled his eyes and scoffed in response. I'm serious, brother. She's not helping Etta settle in. I can hear the doors slamming and the subtle barbs she mutters. I can't force the woman to accept her. She believes you should have married someone local instead of a total stranger. She's right in that you could have had your pick of women in the state, Reese. Reese continued to dead-eye his brother until Farley capitulated and threw his hands in the air. Fine, I will speak to her, but we cannot force them to be friends. He dug his heels in, and his horse took off at speed down the trail, kicking up a light trail of dust as he went. I'd take civility of some description as this starting point, brother, Reese murmured, squeezed his thighs, and his mount set off after his brother. Chapter 11. Etta. You don't like me, do you? Abby's eyes didn't stray from where they were fixed on the point ahead, though resentment seemed to crackle from her. Etta had commented once they were clear from the driveway of Double T, far enough from the ranch to be overheard. In the past few days, Etta had tried to embrace life on the ranch, had tried to join in with life in the house, but Abby had cut her off every time. Her disdainful comments were irksome, to say the least. Even after Reese and she had returned from the township and announced that the wedding had been set, Abby had continued to puff, sigh, and mutter in the background. It was such a stark contrast to the joviality of the two men that it was just that much more noticeable. I don't know you to have an opinion either way. The buggy trundled its way towards the town after Reese had pretty much ordered Abby to accompany Etta into town and pick up some last-minute things for the wedding tomorrow. Etta studied the woman's profile. When Abby returned the look, Etta looked quickly ahead. Abby sighed, fidgeted on the bench. The gentle clink of the harness and the soft thud of the hooves was the only sound. When I met Farley, Reese was all he had. Their parents had left them with their mother's brother whilst they struck out on their own. They were down here a few years before they sent for the boys. I lived near to them. I've been in love with Farley for as long as I can remember. Unexpected tears shafted through Etta as she realized that Abby had married her Samuel. She was living the life that Etta had wanted. She quickly blinked at them, moving her face away so the other woman could not see them. I want to know why you moved here, all this way when you say you had a happy home back in Boston, Abby continued, her tone cold and harsh. Etta could confess all, but she wasn't truly sure why she had moved here. She was veering from despairing homesickness to heartsickness over unrequited love. What's wrong with the men back in Boston? What are you running from? Etta hardened her face as she looked at Abby, who glared back. I chose to come here for my reasons that are none of your concern. We have to get along for the sake of the brothers and for living in the same home. That will be changing soon, mark my words. I won't be told what to do by some city woman who looks down her nose on my home. Etta gasped. I do no such thing. I saw you the first time you looked about the house. I could see it all over your snooty face. Now, I must let you do some of the chores. Farley had nagged me till he's blue in the face about it, and I don't have time to listen to him. I'm guessing you've nagged Reese to nag Farley because you don't have the spine to speak to me yourself. You can cook the dessert. You will also clean the lower half of the house, but you stay out of the kitchen. That's my domain unless I say otherwise. Feed the chickens. I'm also not doing your laundry, or Reese's now, for that matter. And you can do the town errands, seeing as you appear to like spending money so much. Abby sniffed, and Etta narrowed her eyes. She didn't want to dispel the notion that she'd been speaking to Reese when, in reality, she'd been avoiding him where possible. Do I get a say in any of this? What? Are you too good to be told what to do? Can you cook? Clean? Or did all of your house servants do that for you too? Etta had made the mistake of admitting to Reese the other day that they'd had a maid and a cook to help with the household chores in Boston. Abby must have overheard. Pride drove her on to answer. Sounds just dandy to me. Etta. Etta kept the smile plastered to her face until her face was aching. She'd gone through the motions of keeping up the appearance of being happy when really, she just wanted to cry. The wedding has been sweet and simple, yet she had compared it to the lavish occasion of Samuel and Lavinia. Etta had worn a practical and simple blue dress. She had weaved wildflowers into her hair after Baxter had presented them to her in the morning and had been rewarded with his beaming smile. Some of the local women had been stood outside the church to watch the wedding, which had compounded the feeling of being on show. It made Etta feel entirely too uncomfortable. Reese had looked dapper in his smart woolen suit, with a simple vest and a blue chambray shirt that matched her dress, though that had been purely accidental. He'd shaved carefully, and his dark hair was neatly brushed. Etta had gazed up at him, concentrating on keeping thoughts of Samuel firmly from her mind. Reese was a decent man, kind and good-natured. She felt like she was truly duping him. She felt like the ruse to prove a point to Abby had been a foolish one, that maybe she should have waited a bit longer before committing herself to him in marriage, before saying words that were mostly empty in the house of God. Etta missed her family and acknowledged that her mother had been right in that she would feel their absence like a hole. And now, as Reese looked down on her, his handsome face was a picture of warmth and content. This made her remorse even stronger. Maybe she would grow to love him. Maybe theirs wasn't meant to be a consuming love affair where she couldn't breathe. Maybe theirs was meant to be companionship, friendship, calming. She smiled when he caught her hands in his, as he made his vows. His voice was steady and soothing, and for just a moment she felt herself being lulled by the tone, felt herself being pulled, could feel that tremble deep inside that she'd felt on the day she'd met him. It emanated from their touch, and she gave him a genuine smile. She held his gaze as he lowered his head, where he hovered for a second, and her breath hitched in her chest. For the slightest of touches, his mouth brushed the side of her mouth, and then he drew back as the pastor pronounced them husband and wife. Etta left the church in a haze of confusion. She was a married woman. That meant that she now had responsibilities, that Reese would have certain expectations. There would be a wedding night. The thought filled her with terror, with such trepidation that she couldn't bring herself to answer any of the congratulatory words that were passed to them as she was led by Reese to the wagon. He'd forgone the normal tradition of spending their wedding night in an inn, as well as the celebrations of a chivalry. At the time, Etta hadn't given it much thought, but now, as he handed her into the small buggy that waited for them, as he took the reins and headed out of the town, she began to wonder what his intentions were. Soon, they were quite alone, as they headed out of the township, along a road that she'd never been along before. Etta swallowed as she swung her gaze to him. Did she really know him at all? Where was this stranger taking her? Chapter 12. Etta. Where are we going? Reese looked over at her. It's a surprise, he replied. Are you warm enough? With the theatrical warnings of her mother screaming silently in her mind, Etta nodded her head. Surely, if he was planning to attack and kill her, he wouldn't be checking on her comfort. Reese looked out over the landscape, the reins resting loosely in his large hands as his elbows were on his knees. He'd rolled the shirt sleeves back. His arms were tanned, muscled, and had a sprinkling of dark hair over them. Etta moistened her lips, closing off the thought path in her mind. She needed to get a grip. 1 minute she was lamenting over Samuel, the next she was fantasizing over her husband. Instead, she focused on the vista in front of her. The trees were thick and plentiful here, the ground lush and green as the ribbon of road twisted through the path. The buggy bumped over the rutted ground. Wildflowers scattered about, filling the pastures with yellows and pinks and purples. It's a beautiful day, she said, tilting her face to the sun. It's a sign we're blessed, he commented. She looked from him back to the view. The sun sparkled brightly across the mountains, lost in the valleys, then lit up the foothills so they shimmered. Though it was still autumn, wildflowers danced in the sunshine. The buggy bumped over the edge of the road, and she gasped as she spotted the small lake, with the sun glinting off it like diamonds. She sat forward as she stared. My goodness, that's beautiful. She heard the deep rumble of laughter in his chest as he guided the buggy towards the lake and stopped. He lifted her down and set her on her feet, then reached back into the buggy for a small wooden crate and the same blanket that he'd wrapped her in on the day she'd arrived. What's that? He held up his hands. We're having our little private chivalry, if you like. I figured that ours is not a traditional marriage where I've courted you, and where we've had a chance to explore each other's likes and dislikes. We should get to know one another, especially now that we're married. He shot her a wink as he selected a spot on the grassy bank and set the box down, then opened out the blanket with a flick of his wrist. Etta followed him, lifting a hand to shield her eyes as she took in the beauty of the secluded spot. She watched as he set out food from the crate onto the blanket: slices of bread, strips of smoked pork with a piece of hard cheese, crackers, and a fruit cake, and 2 bottles of Perry. "Did you put this together?" she asked as she crossed to the blanket. He indicated that she sat, and he copied, his fingers going to the necktie and pulling at it as he nodded. "I wanted to get the chance to speak to you alone, get to know you, for you to get to know me now that we're married." He tugged again at the constriction. "You can take it off if it's bothering you." He looked about to deny it, and then he shot her a grin and pulled the offending item off, dropped it into the crate. "Are you comfortable? I packed extra cushions if you need them." "You've thought of everything." "I thought of nothing but you since we started writing," he murmured as he set the food out on a piece of cloth. "Best tuck in. If the ants get a whiff of this, we'll be engulfed." He picked up a bread roll, split it in 2, and offered her some. She took it, her eyes narrowed in the sunshine as she looked at him. His confession had startled her somewhat. In fact, part of why he seemed to have such a profound effect on her equilibrium was his unnerving honesty. She wasn't used to people being so open about their feelings. He held her look as he chewed the bread, quickly followed by 2 strips of dried pork, a smile playing about his mouth. "Something on your mind?" His strong throat worked as she swallowed, and she had to drop her gaze. He was doing funny things to her insides again. She blushed a little and shook her head, glancing up to him as he touched her hand. "What is it?" "I'm not sure of myself when I'm with you," she admitted. He chewed what was in his mouth, unclipped the top of the bottle as he deliberated. "That's okay," he replied. "We have a lifetime together to work these things out. I wanted us to be alone so that I could tell you something." He passed her the bottle, then uncorked the second one. "I know you must be nervous about what will happen tonight. I want you to know that nothing will happen until you're ready." Her lips parted in surprise. "We need time to get to know each other, to get used to the other. I sense your reluctance." "Not reluctance," she interrupted him. "Nerves. I'm scared as I have no experience in this." He paused, his blue eyes roaming her face. "Me neither," he admitted. "You have no experience with women?" He shook his head as he shrugged. "There was never any time. It was never on my agenda until recently. I've never been married or even courted anyone. It was always the family, then the ranch, then the work that came with." Etta ran through the myriad of women that Samuel had courted, her mind awhirl. "Were you expecting an experienced man?" She shook her head. "No, I just assumed that because you—" Her voice trailed off as she realized she'd been about to say because he was so handsome, and what did that make her sound like? Simply because he was good-looking, he should have the morals of an alley cat? No. Reese leaned back to rest on an elbow, bottle in his other hand, and stretched his long legs out in front of him. "So, we'll explore that side together. When you're ready?" Gratitude flowed through her. It would have felt wrong to be seen unclothed in front of a man that she barely knew. Though why this hadn't occurred to her whilst she was writing to him in the first place, because she hadn't thought it through, she acknowledged. That was on her. "Thank you. We'll have separate rooms. Tomorrow, I want to take you around the lands so you can pick where we'll build our house." She stared at him. "Build a house?" He lifted the shoulder he wasn't resting on. "Of course, we can't possibly stay under one roof with my brother. I think you should pick." A warm glow at being consulted filled her, and she looked at him through her lashes. "That would be lovely. I have some ideas where might be good, but I'd like to see if your ideas fit with mine. Can you ride a horse?" There was a pause before she started to laugh and covered her face with her hands. "Oh no." "What?" "I'm married to a rancher," she hooted. "It's just occurred to me. I'm married to a rancher, and I have no clue what I'm doing. I'm going to have to learn how to ride a horse and butcher things and set traps. Goodness knows what else." He held his bottle out to her, and she tapped hers to the neck of it. "Best get used to it, Mrs. Tanner," he added, his eyes twinkling at her. Etta took a glug of her drink, her eyes on him as she did so, and she felt a flutter in her gut, a flutter of pleasure, of a little bit of happiness. She began to believe that this might just work. Etta. Etta pulled the cake out of the oven, checked the golden brown crust before she set it on the stovetop to cool. The warm scent filled the house and gave it a homely feel. She'd been Reese's wife for just over a week. True to his word, he'd been courteous and kind, with the occasional touch that set her heart to a shiver. The shivers were getting more frantic. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her, and she would just know what he was thinking, though he never made a move to take the relationship to anything more physical. And she was grateful. She didn't feel pressured. Abby had asked her to make the cake before she'd left for town earlier. Etta had agreed naturally, but had had to ask for a recipe. Once Abby had finished making the scoffing sounds of derision, she'd pointed out a cookbook with a pithy comment about whether she needed help to read it too. The baking had always been done by the cook at home. Yes, she could cook. They were skills that her mother had tried to instill, but Etta had never believed that she'd be in a home that didn't have any help. It had never occurred to her. She had made a nice, soft fruit sponge, like the one they'd had at their wedding picnic. She wanted to join in with this family. She wanted to be a part of it. Etta tidied away the small kitchen, setting the table for supper. Abby probably wouldn't appreciate her helping, but as she'd done her other tasks for the day, and she liked to keep busy until Reese came home. Etta heard Abby pulling up in the wagon, heard the chatter of Baxter and another ranch hand outside, and walked to the door, opened it as Abby bustled on through carrying her purchases. "Can I help?" "No," Abby retorted as she used her hip to push the bags onto the table. Then she hurried outside to fetch more. Etta sighed. She knew that Abby was reluctant to have her here, but she seemed to be going out of her way to make things uncomfortable for them both. She needed to have it out with her soon, clear the air once and for all. Abby came back in and turned. "These came for you." She had 2 envelopes in her hand. "I was at the store and Horace gave them to me." "Oh," Etta took them from her. "Thank you." Did you get the cake done?" "Yes, and set the table," Etta said, matching her tart tone. "Right. I'll take it from here. You probably want to catch up with news from Boston." She waved at the post that Etta held. When she turned them over, she recognized her mother's handwriting, which had a return address. Etta looked at the second one. Slowly, her stomach did a long roll as she recognized the printed scroll. She must have emitted a gasp as Abby stilled and gave her a sharp look. "What is it? Bad news? Do you need to go back home?" Etta's brows fell as a torrent of emotions built within. "This is my home," she snapped back, "whether you like it or not." She whirled on a heel and fled from the room, up the stairs and down the passageway until she could slam her bedroom door. She leaned back against the wood and heaved in a breath. Her eyes dropped to the post in her hand that now trembled. She thought she'd escaped him. But there it was, clear as the nose on her face. A letter from Samuel. Chapter 13. Etta. "Here it is," Abby declared to the room as she stepped through from the kitchen and set the cake onto the table with a flourish. "Cooked by Etta's own hands, following a recipe," she added. "Looks good," Reese said, his bright eyes on her. Supper had passed in a blur. Conversation had flowed around Etta, and she'd all but choked down a mouthful and then pushed the plate away without tasting a morsel. Reese hadn't said a word, though he kept looking at her, brows drawn. Etta tried to follow the chatter, but her mind kept returning to the letter upstairs, sat on her chest of drawers, unopened. She'd stared at it as if it was a coiled rattlesnake, until Baxter had tapped on the door to announce that their evening meal was being served. Abby cut everybody a generous slice, set the plates out, and then sat back in her chair to Farley's right before she linked her fingers together under her chin. There was a moment of silence as they all took a bite. Yuck! It was Baxter's sound of disgust that brought Etta out of her daydream as he spat his piece of cake back out. "That is horrible!" Etta looked about the table as Farley and Reese pulled a disgusted face each. Only Abby sat serenely in her chair, her hands tucked under her chin as she tried to hide her smug look with feigned shock. "What's the matter, Bax?" "That's disgusting." He licked his sleeve to try and rid the taste from his mouth, then gulped some milk. "What's wrong with it?" Etta asked, and took a bite of her cake. Baxter was right. It was just awful. Instead of a sweet and light sponge, it was salty and sour. She rushed to the trash can and spat the mouthful out. "I don't understand. I followed the recipe." Reese pushed his plate away, drank from his glass of beer, swilling his mouth for good measure as he tried to conceal his laughter. "Don't worry about it. I'm sure you'll get better with practice." Etta looked along the counter with confusion. She'd taken the time to measure all of the ingredients out carefully, wanting to prove to Abby that she was worthy of being Reese's wife. Ingredients that Abby had set out. "Maybe we should call your cook back in Boston. Ask them to come and help with your chores," Abby sniggered. Farley pushed his plate away. "I didn't much care for fruitcake beforehand, Etta." They were all laughing at her, clearly thinking that the city girl couldn't hack life of practicality and being a homemaker. Reese patted her on her shoulder. "I won't hold it against you. Maybe we'll get you to try something not quite so taxing next time. I'll go and finish up outside." "Farley, you coming?" Baxter shuffled down from the table, rocketing out of the room behind the men before his mother could task him with clearing the table. Abby watched them go. Her expression softened as she began stacking the plates and carried them to the sink. Etta tracked her movements with narrowed eyes, and she folded her arms. Abby set the last of the dinner things next to the sink and then turned to face the scowl with a cocked brow. "What?" "I know what you did." There was no mistaking that smug smile. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "You put out the ingredients that I used today. You switched the sugar for salt." Abby added water to the sink, sprinkled in soap flakes. "You should be able to tell the difference just by looking at it." "So, you tricked me for what reason? To make me look a fool?" Abby snickered. "Worked, didn't it? I know it was you that cut the washing line the other day, too, so that Reese's clothes dropped into the dirt. You're trying to make me look incompetent or stupid, Abby." Abby paused and glared at Etta. "You are incompetent." Every whilst was 7%. "Everyone in the area knows it, including Reese. You're here thinking that he's a wealthy rancher. He isn't, and Baxter will inherit this place. You should just go back home. You're way out of your depth here. I know that you're hiding something, too. I'm guessing it has something to do with those letters that had you scurrying up the stairs earlier to read alone. You shouldn't have secrets from your husband, Henrietta." Her name was sneered out of a twisted mouth. Etta's temper glittered in her eyes and she leaned forward. "You're threatened by me?" she whispered as realization struck her and a smirk curved her lips. "You should be. I'm on to you now, and I'm not going anywhere, Abigail." Etta. It had been 2 days since Samuel's letter had arrived. She had taken the good-natured ribbing over the cake that had ended up being fed to the chickens. She'd been more vigilant over her laundry and her baking tasks. She'd spent the morning cleaning and was now sat on the small stool next to the neat white dressing table in her room. Outside, the rain fell in a steady patter, churning the yard into a muddy mess. The mountains were hidden by the low clouds that clung to them, shrouding the area in a hazy mist. It suited her droll mood. With a sigh, she broke the seal on the envelope and slid out the paper. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the first line. "My dearest darling Etta, I hope that you are well. It feels strange to have to write to you when I wish that you were here in front of me. I miss your face. I miss our conversations. I miss you. I was most dismayed when I called on you when you hadn't responded to my letters. I did not believe the rumors that you had left to marry a stranger, but your maid confirmed it for me. It took some bribing, but I eventually got it out of the wretched woman. I feel like I've made a grave mistake in marrying Lavinia. I know that I am drunk now, though. This is the only way I feel free enough to tell you that she is hard work. I need someone easy like you, easy to talk to, easy to be with. Come home so that I may look upon your face once more. I feel it will ease my spirit and soothe my mind. Please. Yours forever, Samuel Dickson." By the time she had finished the letter, her cheeks were wet with tears, the words that she had yearned to hear in so long. But why had he waited? What had gone on between Samuel and his wife? Wife. She was a wife now, too. Voices below her window drew her gaze, and she tilted forward to watch Reese, his shoulders hunched against the inclement weather as he loaded up sacks into the wagon, his jovial nature evident still from here as he clapped one of his workers on the shoulder. Reese was a good man, honest to boot. She had started to have feelings for him, to feel that small bud of hope nestled in her belly as she looked upon him. A small tingle of excitement as she looked forward to hearing his bootsteps on the porch at the end of the long day. She had a life here. She had a husband. Just what did Samuel expect her to do? Chapter 14. Etta. Etta straightened and pushed the lock of hair off her face using the back of her hand, leaned back to stretch her spine out. She refused to complain to Abby about having to clean the fire out every day, sift the cinders to use in the stove, but it was a filthy job and she hated it. She bent once more, replacing the fire grate, hung the fire irons back, and pulled the covers off the furniture. She could hear footsteps moving about upstairs and knew that Abby was immersed in her cleaning routine. Maybe that was a good thing that they were separated by floors. Try as she might, she couldn't find a single thing about the woman that she liked. It didn't help that her sour mood was compounded by lack of sleep. She had worked harder and harder each day in the hopes that she would fall into bed exhausted and have her mind switch off from thinking about that troubling letter from Samuel. Etta walked out the back door, careful not to spill any of the ashes onto the back stoop as she headed to the vegetable patch to sprinkle the ashes into the flower beds. The weather was calm, and there was a distinct chill in the air. Footfall behind her made her whirl on a start, and the zing of pleasure she got from seeing Reese filled her. For a moment, she sent him a grin. "You're back early." "Hungry man," he grinned at her, coming to stand in front of her. He touched a finger to her cheek. "Is this a new makeup look you're going for?" His fingertip came away black, and she rubbed her cheek with her hand. "I always seem to end up covered in the wretched stuff," she replied, vexed as his chuckle deepened when she merely succeeded in spreading the ash about more. "Ah! I was thinking about maybe taking a ride out so we can go and look at some of the lands, pick a spot to build on." The thought of time alone with him made that pleasure zing up a level. "Let me go wash up?" "Of course," he nodded. "I'll go and saddle you a horse up." "Do you want to eat first?" She cleaned up, changed into a pair of soft lambskin pants that had padding at the knees that she'd seen some of the other local women wearing, and some longer boots. She tied her hair back into a loose plait and checked her appearance. Her eyes fell to the drawer where the letter was kept. Not today, she thought. She looked back at her appearance and realized that for the first time in months, she was starting to feel more like her old self. Having Samuel's letter had only served as a miserable reminder of her old life, the one that she had run away from. He'd been drunk when he'd written it. What did that tell her? That he was having a moment of nostalgia, probably. She hadn't been happy there, pining for Samuel as he threw her tidbits of company and the occasional kind word to stoke her interest in him. Here, she had a man who was seeking to spend time with her. He was asking for her opinions and looking at ways to make her happy, packing her a picnic and who made an effort for her. Tonight she would write back to Samuel and tell him that he'd made his choice, he'd made his bed, and now he must lie in it. She was a married woman on the brink of a new life. Etta. The sun shone in the cloud-spotted sky, a beautiful blue that was punctured with the majestic gray of the mountains that ran along the horizon. Etta sat on her roan pony and held a gloved hand to her eyes as she surveyed the land. "Here," she confirmed with a nod and met Reese's grin with one of her own. "What?" He shook her head. "This is one of my favorites too," he replied, "with the mountains to look at and all these fields." Inked. "We could join the main drive that-a-way, and it's far enough from the main house that we'll be secluded, but not far for me to go to work." He swung his leg over and dismounted, hooking the reins on a low-lying branch. Etta copied, stumbled a bit as she dropped to the ground and joined him where the ground rose slightly. "We could have the main room here, with a big wide window." He angled his arms to capture the view of the evergreen trees, then did exaggerated steps along as if measuring out. Then a kitchen here, going to the stairs, he carried on, mapping out the house that he'd imagined for them. Etta trailed behind him as she joined in the fantasy. She could easily picture it. "We need a bench or a seat to relax on, watch the sunsets," she supplied, and he spun on a heel. "It makes me happy that your tastes align with mine." He stood next to her and slipped his hand into hers. His touch sent sensation rippling through her, and she looked to his profile as she felt her heart flutter. And they stood joined, surveying the spot that would be their home. Etta. Etta closed the bedroom door and leaned against it, holding the bubble of happy close to her chest. The afternoon spent with Reese had been close to the most perfect of her life. They'd ridden the land and their conversation had flowed as they'd gotten to know each other. He was interesting and funny. He'd been attentive as she'd begun to tire from being in the saddle all afternoon. She knew that she'd ache tomorrow, but it would be worth it. She pushed away from the frame as her eyes fell upon the drawer of her dresser and she froze to the spot. The drawer had been closed when she'd left with Reese earlier. Now it was open, as was Samuel's letter set on the dresser top. Next to it sat another envelope, still sealed with Samuel's writing on. She crossed to the desk and picked up the scribbled note that was set next to the papers. "Tell him or I will." Fury bubbled through her at the invasion of privacy. Abby. Chapter 15. Reese. He untacked his ride, hanging the saddle and cloth on the rack as he turned his mare into the corral, watched as she dropped to her knees and rolled onto her back to rub the day away, legs in the air. He shook his head on a sigh, knowing it was going to be a pain to comb the dried clumps out of her coat tomorrow, but that would be tomorrow's problem. His body ached from hammering posts into the ground all day. They'd finished replacing the railings to fence off the ravine where the cow had fallen last month. Then they'd decided to extend the fence line as some of the ground had dropped away in the recent rainfall. He closed the shed doors, dropped the bar into place, and his eyes tracked over the familiar line of the family home. He'd been pleased that Etta had selected the plot of land he'd wanted. He liked that their thoughts seemed to align, though over the past 2 weeks she'd been distant from him once more. He'd believed that he'd made a breakthrough, could sense her warming to him after they'd wed. It had made his heart sing, though since they'd spent the afternoon planning out their home, it had felt that she'd been deliberately avoiding him. He'd tested this theory after church last Sunday, when he'd had a few hours off, so had invited her to go for a ride to their land, to see the timbers that had been laid out in the building plan. She'd declined and had instead spent the afternoon in her room. He couldn't shake the feeling of disconnection, of her glum mood. He would seek her out today and try and get to the bottom of it. He could hear raised voices as he stepped up onto the porch. His brows drew together in consternation as he pushed open the back door. Abby stood with her hands resting on Baxter's shoulders, who had his eyes squeezed tightly shut. Etta faced the other woman, fists clenched and fury spitting from her eyes. Reese moved his gaze between the two of them as he removed his hat, hung it up. Both women moved away from each other. Baxter, grateful for the reprieve, bolted for the back door. Reese watched his nephew retreat and wondered if it would be appropriate to follow him. Instead, he put his hands on his hips and asked, "What's going on?" "Her," Abby spat, lifting a finger to point. "Coming in here, acting like she's a know-it-all." Etta rounded on her with a gasp. "I did no such thing. I was merely helping the child understand maths. There is nothing wrong with educating a child." She looked to Reese. Bax was counting his building blocks. I was using the opportunity to check his knowledge. "I will do the educating around here," Abby interjected. "Honestly, you are wrapped so tight, trying to hold everything to your chest, you won't let anyone in." "He's my child." It was arithmetic, for crying out loud. Etta yelled back. "Right." Reese raised his voice, waving a hand to call for a truce. "Enough. Clearly, you both have an issue with each other. We must live together, all of us, until the new house is finished. Now I suggest you both go and cool off. Etta flung her arms wide and stomped to the front door, slamming it back into the frame for good measure behind her. Reese looked to Abby, who was glaring at the space she'd left before turning the angry look on him. "I'm sick of her trying to interfere, Reese. I cannot stand the woman. She's less than useless, and—" "That's enough," he said, quietly. "She's my wife. She has as much right to this house as you do, Abby. I know you've had a problem with her from the get-go. I know she's had some issues settling into a life here, but she's trying. You're not being very Christian-like, in my opinion." "Pa," she barked out. "That woman is no more a Christian than I am a man." "Has she told you about the letters she's been receiving? Who they're from?" He'd assumed that they were from her family and her friends. "No, I have no reason to doubt her." Abby's eyes narrowed. "Well, you should. She is a vixen. Proverbs 12:22. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy." Reese stared at her as his mind whirred. Was Abby right? Had Etta been leading him a merry dance? "Tell me what you know." Abby's hands slapped her thighs as she lifted them to shrug and then dropped them back. "I've seen a letter. I found it. I don't trust her. She was furious with me for snooping, but I knew that something was wrong. I could feel it here in my gut." She placed a hand on her stomach. "When did you find it?" "A couple of weeks ago. She'd been acting strange. I picked up the letters a day or so after the wedding. She's had more since with the same handwriting, but I haven't seen them." Reese swallowed as he felt his heart bump in his chest. Was this why she had pulled back from him again? "What did the letter say?" Abby's lip twisted in a sneer. "She has a love, a married man by all accounts. It seems like he's got money. He's asked her to go back to him." He rocked back on his heels as he stared dumbfounded at his sister-in-law, blood roaring in his ears. Suddenly, it all seemed to click into place and make sense. A myriad of moments since Etta had arrived ran through his mind, and he began to put it all together, starting with the fact that he'd got the idea that she was running from something in the first place. "She denied it all, of course," Abby continued as Reese stepped away. He rubbed the heel of his hand to his chest, trying to ease the shaft of pain that sliced through him. Then he dragged the same hand through his hair as despair closed in on him. He looked again at his sister-in-law. He wasn't sure if her look was glee or regret. "I told her to tell you. I believe that she owes you that." "Enough, Abby." His tone was sharper than he intended, but it stilled her mouth. He lifted his gaze to movement and saw Etta in the yard. With a growl in his throat, he stormed out of the house. Etta glanced up, giving him a second glance as he glowered at her. He stalked past her, pointed at the shed behind her, and straight-armed his way through the door. Etta trotted behind him, and Reese slammed the door into place, sliding the wooden latch across. He checked that they were alone before he whirled on her. "Is what Abby tells me true?" She gasped, and color filled her cheeks as her mouth flapped about. "Tell me the truth." He roared at her. Chapter 16. Etta. Etta balked at the furious man before her. His blue eyes glittered as he looked down at her. She should have known that Abby would follow up on her threat. She'd been looking for a way of thwarting their budding romance, and Etta had all but given her the opportunity gift-wrapped. Abby hadn't read the follow-up letter that Samuel had sent, this one, written when he was sober. He'd reiterated his love for her. He missed her and wanted her back. Etta, infuriated by the intrusion from Samuel, had ended up having a blazing row with Abby for interference. Poor Baxter had been caught in the middle of that one, too. "Say something," he said, and his voice cracked with emotion. Etta stared at her husband as she realized that he was hurting, and she was responsible for his pain. "Reese, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I didn't know." "Told me what? That you love another?" "No, She sighed and waved her hands to try and explain herself. She wanted him to know the truth. "I did love him. At least, I thought I did." "Then you should go and be with him." He turned away from her. "I don't want this if your heart isn't in it." Her heart tripped over the finality in his tone. She took a step towards him as she realized that she didn't want to lose him. "Reese, don't say that." "It's fine. I'll take you and put you on the train myself." "No." He spoke over his shoulder. "I know that you've struggled with life here. to adjust to our ways since you've arrived. If he can offer you more than I can, if you can be happy with him, then you should go and be with him." Her eyes filled at his words. She'd tried so hard to please him, to try and fit in here, to be what she thought he needed her to be. "I've turned myself inside out trying to be the bride you wanted. Instead, your sister-in-law has tried her hardest to ruin what we have at every turn. I've been trying to be the woman you want, that you deserve." He rounded on her, anguish twisting his features. "I want you to be yourself, Etta. I want you to be happy here. I can see that's just not possible." "No, you can't." Pain, deeper, more acute than when Samuel shunned her, gripped her, and she began to sob. "You've heard what you want to believe. You haven't even read the letters. I will show them to you." He lifted his arms wide. "I don't want to read about another man being with my wife." "I haven't been with another man," she shouted back. "If you let me finish my sentences, I will explain it all to you." The thumping on the door cut her off again, and she moaned in exasperation. Farley's voice came through the wood. "Reese, open up." "Not now, Farley," Reese roared back. "Yes, now. Open the door." Reese growled and threw the wood bar across the space. It clattered against the far wall as he yanked the door back. "What? It's Baxter." Etta could hear the quiver in the other man's voice, and she moved closer. She could hear Abby's frantic shouts from somewhere beyond the yard. Fear streaked through her with the sense of foreboding. "What about him?" she asked. "He's missing, Etta." Etta sat on her bed, fully clothed with the pillows stacked up behind her. She watched as the sky began to change, from blackest of black to a deep violet. She could make out the outline of the trees as dawn nudged the darkness back, bringing light to the world. Normally, she loved this time of the morning, to see the new day being born. Today, dread pressed in on her. She'd been out with the rest of the crew until her horse was stumbling over the pitch-dark ground, and it had been too dark to see. Abby had been frantic, inconsolable, as she ripped the yard, then beyond, apart, searching for Baxter. Reese had kept his distance, his face closed off to her as she'd saddled up with the rest of the ranch hands. Throughout the evening, more and more of the community showed up, and their search spread out beyond the vicinity of the yard. As she'd guided her mount across the grasslands, guilt had ripped at her. It nagged at her like a toothache. The arguing with Abby, the taunts and comments that they'd flung at each other over the head of the small child. Now, with his happy energy missing, she felt the loss keenly. After dark, she had ridden back to the house while the rest of the men had continued looking on foot. Kerosene lamps held high. Feeling impotent, Etta had slunk away to her room under the weight of her despondency. She dragged her silly dramas into this lovely home, and she felt terrible. All she wanted was to see that sweet boy. She put her hands together, as she had often on that long night, and she prayed. She prayed that he look after Baxter, that they would find him alive and well, that he look after the men who were out looking, that he take care of Reese. She felt the burn of her tears as Reese slunk into her mind's eye. She prayed harder because Reese was a good man, and he deserved to be happy. She swung her feet over the side of the bed, feeling for her boots. She pulled them on, determined to stop sitting idle. She felt useless. She felt to blame. She cracked open the door and listened. The house sat in silence as she crept through it down the stairs. She'd fill a canteen and go and tack up her ride. She had to do something. Baxter must be scared, maybe injured. The sniff had her whirling in the dark and slammed her heart into her throat. She exhaled shakily as she saw Abby sitting at the kitchen table. The small candle sat in the center, having burned down to a nub. Even from across the room, Etta could see the grief etched into her face. Remorse rolled over her as she crossed the expanse between them, halting for a moment as she reached the threshold of the kitchen. Abby tilted her distraught face up, and Etta's indecision went out of the window. She dropped to her knees next to the woman. "Oh, Abby, I'm so sorry." Fresh tears tracked down her cheeks as she tilted her head. "Where's my boy, Etta?" "I don't know, but you have the whole town out looking for him." She put her hands on Abby's and squeezed. "What if?" She stopped and put her fingers to her lips as if to stop the words from coming out, as if speaking them would make them real. "He's my only child. I kept losing the others. He is my miracle from God. Etta pulled her in for a hug, rubbed her back as she rocked them. "We'll find him. I know it." "How do you know?" She leaned back, swept at the tears with the pad of her thumbs. "I believe it, Abby. Come on, it's getting lighter. Let's join the search." Abby shook her head. "I should stay here in case he comes home. He might just walk through the door and," her voice broke again, "you'll feel better if you have something to focus on." Etta stood and pulled Abby to standing. "Besides, you know what men are like when they're looking. They can't see the woods for the trees, even on a good day. Get some water. Baxter will be thirsty. Maybe a snack. He's going to be starving." Abby swallowed as she stared, then wrung her hands as her uncertainty gave way. Energized, she nodded. "You're right. He'll be starving." "Great. I'll go sort the horses." Etta left the house. The daylight was sufficiently out enough where she could see across the yard. The stables were dry and dusty, and the horses that had been left behind stared at her from their pens. Shunang, she noted that Reese and Farley's mounts were already gone. She hadn't heard them leave and felt the pang of sorrow at this. But, right now, she couldn't deal with the mess that was her marriage. She needed to focus on what she could control and help reunite that sweet boy with his mama. Quickly, she tacked up and was in the yard when Abby came out of the yard, a small wrapped parcel in her hand that she tucked into a saddlebag and added it to her ride. "Think now, Abby." Etta swung her leg up and over her mare and settled herself in, her body moving fluidly as the mare jigged under her weight. Where would Baxter go? He was obviously scared from us arguing again. Where would he feel safest? Abby joined her, gathering up the reins. "I've racked my brains as to where he could be. Farley, Reese, and them, they all went where I said. Saw no sign of him. Then we'll look again. He has to be here somewhere." Etta leaned across the space between them to capture her hand. "We'll find him," she told Abby earnestly. "I feel it in my bones. Come on." Etta dug her heels into her mare's ribs, and they headed out of the yard. The sun was nearing its zenith. Instead of admiring the stunning beauty of the area, the vista that she had fallen in love with, Etta could feel her assured positivity from this morning begin to wane. He'd been missing almost a whole day now. Horrors of wild animals and other unimaginable dangers chilled her mind. She touched the tiny cross at her throat, pushed away the dark thoughts that were ebbing in. Abby rode alongside her. They'd crisscrossed the land, working cogently from the nucleus of the ranch in circles around the house. They'd passed by several other of the townsfolk, exchanged information. One of them informed her that Reese and Farley had been seen heading towards the foothills, deeper into the forest. They topped a small mound, and Abby stopped, pushed back her hat, and exhaled noisily. The land spread out before them, and Etta could make out shapes of people searching the land, like tiny insects. The gentle breeze slapped at her shirt, and Etta lifted her face to the sky, grateful to just sit atop her ride for a moment. Steer dotted the pastures, and her eyes tracked beyond the fields, to where the trees nestled the foothills. Maybe Reese and Farley had already found him. Maybe they should head back to the house. "Where to now?" Abby asked, fatigue dulling her voice. Etta knew that neither of them had slept all night. They needed a break, some food. Etta turned to look at her head whipping back around as she frowned at the small copse that was off to her right. She paused, wondered what had caught her eye. She waited, eyes narrowed, for whatever it was to make itself known. "Etta?" Etta lifted a hand to signal to wait. There it was again, a strange bird flapping in the tree. It fluttered against the breeze, and Etta's breath stuttered in her chest. "What color shirt was Baxter wearing yesterday?" "What? Abby!" Etta's voice rose. "Bax, what color was his shirt?" Abby's eyes followed the direction in which Etta was staring. Red, I think. Why? There!" Etta shouted, squeezed her heels into the ribs of her mare, and sent her surging forward. Chapter 17. Etta. Etta's mare slid to a stop at the tree line, and Etta had dismounted before they'd come to a complete halt. She threw the reins over a branch and paused at the edge of the thicket to try and gauge where she'd seen the piece of cloth flapping in the breeze. From this angle, she couldn't see it. She looked down into the bowl where the trees were gathered. The undergrowth was in darkness, thick with brushwood and dried leaves. vines of ivy spreading its fingers across the brown carpet of vegetation. Abby rushed up next to her, breathless as she peered down into the dip. What do you see? Red, hanging in the trees. Etta stepped through the fence railings and plunged down the bank, batting at the low-lying branches that slapped at her face. She kept looking up, trying to pinpoint the material. Baxter, are you here? Bax? Abby joined in with calling out as the two women pushed on, spreading out to cover the ground. Baxter, honey, it's Mama. The treetops thinned out slightly, and Etta stepped into a pool of daylight. Twigs snapped underfoot as she walked. She caught the red shirt fluttering in the breeze and hurried towards. Abby, over here, she screamed as she spotted Red at the foot of a tree. She rushed to the child's side, fell to her knees as her hands hovered over him. Oh, Baxter, sweetheart, can you hear me? Her breath whooshed out of her as she saw his eyelids flutter. Abby collapsed on the ground next to her son, sobbing as she cradled his head. Oh, Baxter. Easy, Abby, easy. Look, they both looked down at her hands that came away bloodied. Oh no, Baxter, can you hear me, honey? Bax? His eyes fluttered again. Mama? Yes, sweetheart, I'm here. Oh, Etta, oh, I can't believe it. Mama, I'm cold, he croaked. You're okay, I'm here. Abby took off her shawl, lay it over his body as she pressed a kiss to his face. My sweet boy, Etta ran her hands gently over his small body where it lay prone on the ground. As she ran a hand along his leg, she felt the bone give under her gentle probing. Abby, bring me the water for him. Then I need you to go call for the doc. I need flour, too. Flour? Etta raised her voice. Yes, and the doctor. Go now. I'll stay with him. I won't let anything happen to him, I promise. Abby nodded her head once, quickly returning with the water and another blanket. Hurry, Abby. Etta focused on the little boy as they were left alone. Aunt Etta? Baxter moved his head slightly. Her heart swelled at the use of her name. It was the first time he'd called her aunt. Yes, Bax. I don't feel so good. We're going to fix you right up now, don't you worry. You had everyone worried. The whole town is out looking for you. She took the cap off the canteen and held it to his lips. Sip now, don't gulp. Am I in trouble? She pressed a kiss to his forehead. No, sweetheart. She tore a strip out of her skirt and rolled it up, pressed it to the cut on his face, got another, tucked it onto the laceration at the back of his head. We've been looking for you all night. What happened? He squinted his eyes up and lifted a hand to point. Good, she thought, he can move. I climbed the tree as sometimes the deer come in here, but my shirt got caught and I was stuck. Then I woke up down here and it was dark. I cried, Aunt Etta. That's okay, Baxter. You're allowed to cry. You're so brave. She scanned the area about them, saw what she needed, looked for another one. Keep talking to me. Can I have some more water? In a moment, Bax. Your leg, you've damaged your leg. I think it's broken. Mama's gone for the doctor. She sat down next to him and rolled up her skirt, slid off her stockings. What are you doing? His eyes popped wide as he stared at her bare legs. She grinned at him. You don't be telling people you saw now. He squeezed his eyes shut tight. I'm not telling that, he swallowed. Where's Ma? He shouted as she aligned one of the branches she'd collected alongside his leg, reached for the other to press along the other side. She had to snap part of the wood off to make it shorter, and she tried again. Okay, Bax. She patted his hand so that he looked at her. I need to move your bad leg so that it doesn't flap about when we take you home. It's going to hurt like nobody's business. I need you to be brave for me. I'll be as quick as I can. Then we'll get you home and get you some food. How about some delicious cake, too? Did you make it? Came the feeble response. She laughed and braced herself. No, sweetheart. Mama's cake only. Ready? Reese? He saw Etta's mare tethered to the tree and hit the ground by her running as he got off, pausing only long enough to grab the flour bag before he ducked under the fence. Farley was already down the embankment, calling out. Here, he heard Etta's reply. We're over here. Reese followed his brother through the bushes. His heart tripped against his ribcage as he spotted Etta kneeling next to Bax. He took in the sight of her over Farley's head. She was bloodied, and her skirt was damaged. When they'd met a frantic Abby on her way home, his fear over his nephew's safety had met with a new dread. She'd barked at them to get the flour, explained where Etta was, and took off again at speed to go and find the doctor. He wasn't sure why his sister-in-law had been out with Etta. That was a question for later. Seeing her now, covered in mud and leaves, her eyes red from crying and her hair mussed and escaping its confines, he'd never seen her look more beautiful. "Baxter, we've been out of our minds looking for you, son. Are you okay?" "Hi, Pa." "I'm awful sorry," he began, but his father shook his head. "Don't be." "I think he fell from the tree," Etta explained. "His leg is damaged. He has a few cuts on his head. I've told him the girls love a scar." Baxter wrinkled his nose. "What have you done to his leg?" Reese looked at the contraption that was binding the branches together. On closer inspection, he spotted her stockings tying them together. Etta stood up and answered him. "I think it's broken. It's to stabilize it whilst we move him. I read it in a book," she answered his puzzled expression. "Abby's gone for the doc. We'll meet her at the house." Reese held up the flower, a question in his eyes. "The same book?" She grabbed the bag and opened it, tipping some into her hand, and she pressed it to the wound on Baxter's head. "Yes, it helps soak up the blood. It started bleeding again when we arrived, though it's plenty crusty enough where it's bled overnight. We should get him off the ground." The men took the blanket off him and laid it on the ground next to him, then carefully laid him on top. Baxter moaned in pain at moving, and Etta spoke to him in a calming tone, telling him that she would make sure he got a big bag of candy from the store. It distracted him as Reese and Farley carried him over the uneven ground. Reese saw the wagon being pulled up the hill, saw Bill, the ranch hand, at the reins, and between the three of them, they passed Baxter over the fence. Before long, more of the search party arrived as news had spread of their location. Reese was swamped with emotion as it felt like the whole community had joined the search for one of their own. They loaded Baxter into the back of the wagon, and Farley leaped up next to him, his eyes not leaving his child. Reese could sense the feeling of relief, of utter joy at finding him ripple through the group. He spoke to the locals, thanking them for their assistance. He invited them back to the house, knowing that to feed and water them would be the right thing to do. He watched as the wagon made its way back down the grassy knoll, saw his brother lying down on his back next to his son, and felt a mix of longing and happiness spear through him. He'd wanted that for himself. Family and a child he thought he might have it with. Where was she? He spun on his heel, and then he saw her, stood barefoot in the grass, her face buried in the neck of her mare. As he crossed over to her, he saw her shoulders shaking. He hesitated, recalling their crosswords from yesterday. Did he have the right to comfort her? Did she want him to when she loved another? When she lifted her face away from her horse, when her watery gaze met his, her misery nearly broke him. Without a second thought, he walked over to her and cradled her in his arms as she began to cry. Chapter 18. Etta. The same sun that she'd seen rising that morning was just as stunning as it dissolved into the tree line. The sky flowed from blue to violet, streaked with magenta and rosy pinks, as darkness claimed the land for itself once more. Etta toed the ground and sent the chair to rock once more, her head lolled back against the padding of the blanket she'd carried out with her earlier. The house had been pandemonium when she'd arrived back earlier, cradled across the front of Reese's saddle. They'd not exchanged a word after her crying jag had subsided. Instead, he'd wordlessly retrieved her boots from where she'd found Baxter before he'd lifted her onto his saddle, swinging over his leg, and then nestled her against him. They'd ridden in silence, and she had allowed her head to rest on his shoulder as the events of the morning shuddered through her. Baxter was being treated by the doc when they had got back. Etta had gone up to her room to change her dress and to wash. She'd sent a prayer of thanks when she'd been alone, when the shock of finding him and helping had worn off. All day she had helped feed the townsfolk, shared in their relief and joy at having found Baxter safe and well. Even whilst a lethargy stole over her body now, she wasn't tired enough to sleep. She heard the door squeak open, and her eyes met Abby's in the glow of the lamp she carried. She hooked the door closed with her foot and carried a small plate out to Etta. She sat gingerly on edge of the seat and pushed the plate of food at her. "Here, I don't think you've eaten yet." She accepted the plate and stared down at it without touching anything. How is he? A smile touched her mouth. Doc says he's going to have a limp, but he'll heal up just fine. He's given him some pain relief, and now he's sleeping. Doc said that what you did with the twigs, that helped keep the bones from moving about and causing more damage inside the leg. Etta nodded. Good, that's good. Abby stared at her through the darkness, and Etta met the other woman's tear-filled gaze with one of her own. Etta, I'm so grateful to you. I'd all but given up hope. You took charge. You kept me going. No, let me speak. She stilled Etta's protest by patting the air. I've been so dreadful to you. I don't know what got into me. And when I needed you most, you were a true friend. I can never thank you enough. You saw him. You saved him. Tears trickled down her cheeks as she caught Abby's hand, held it in her own. Someone led us to that spot, when the wind was in the right direction, showed us the way to Baxter. They looked after him last night, gave him a soft landing, made sure his shirt caught so that it slowed the fall, and gave us the marker we needed to see him. Etta squeezed Abby's hand. I am sorry, too, for bringing my mess of a life here and for bringing disruption to your beautiful home. Etta, her sister-in-law leaned forward and put her arms around her. The Lord has taught me a lesson in humiliation and gratitude. He sent you here for a reason. She leaned back and cupped Etta's cheeks in her palms. Thank you. Etta's mouth curved upwards. Not bad for a hoity-toity city girl? Abby dissolved into laughter and settled in next to her, leaning her head on the other woman's shoulder. They lapsed into a companionable silence, and Etta plucked up a piece of bacon from her plate. Chewed it. She was on her third piece when she heard the throat clearing. Her eyes followed the sound, and she could make out the shadow of a man from across the yard. Abby excused herself when Reese stepped into the light from the lamp to leave the two of them alone. Etta set the plate on the floor as she turned and faced her husband. He looked formidable as the light played on the harsh angles of his face. He'd changed clothes, too. Have you slept at all yet? She asked him as he leaned back on the rail that ran around the deck. He shook his head and folded his arms, settled himself more by crossing an ankle over the other. He looked exhausted. Have you been stood there long? Long enough? She shifted in her seat, unable to settle. She exhaled shakily. She hated this huge distance between them. She longed for the laughing man, for this chasm to be gone. I need to tell you something. Can it wait? I don't want to argue anymore. She shook her head. No, it can't wait. She rose and stood next to him, her eyes blindly roaming the shrouding darkness. She could feel the tension rolling off him. I should have told you about the letters, she admitted simply, and she sensed, rather than saw, him tense up. Just listen. Don't go all defensive, please, Reese. Please just let me finish, and then you can have your say, okay? She saw the set to his jaw, saw the muscle bouncing there. He jerked his head. Thank you. Abby was right. I should have told you about the letters. I feel keeping them a secret gave them more credence than they deserved. They were from my oldest friend, Samuel. He married another woman, and I couldn't stand to see them together, so I came here. You loved him? He stated, though she sensed it more of a question. I thought I did, yes, until I met you. The first time I saw you, you affected me in a way that threw me. I'd never been so aware of myself. You were perfectly charming and affable. You declared yourself and your feelings so simply and honestly. It disarmed me for a while, and I waited for the punchline. She met his steady gaze in the dimness, the lamp making his eyes more glow amber than brown. Only the punchline never came. I realized I was in love with you when we picked the house location together. When I got back, Abby had found the letter, left the second one for me to see. I panicked. I'd told you that I'd left nothing behind in Boston. I arrived here a heartsick bride, believing myself to be able to outrun my emotions. But what I felt for you paled into comparison. I knew that she would tell you, but there never seemed to be the right time to tell you. I didn't want you to look at me in a different light, like the way you looked at me yesterday in the barn, she added in a whisper. His lips parted and she shook her head. The third letter was berating me. He called me a fool for not going back to Boston. You'd replied to him? Her lips curved upwards, and she closed the distance between them so that his hands dropped to rest on her hips. You bet I did. I used my fancy hoity-toity city girl words and told him in no uncertain terms that I was in love with my husband and had no intention of returning to a man who didn't have the courage to write to me sober, that my husband was cut from decent cloth who would never entertain another woman behind my back. His fingers slid to the small of her back and linked, nestling her into the cradle of his hips. That's twice that you've said that now, he murmured. She slid her palms up over the bulges of his muscled chest to rest on his shoulders and cocked her head to look at him. Her body hummed to life where it met his, and pleasure shimmered through her. Said what? That you love me. Her smile grew as she leaned into him. You noticed that, huh? His brow hitched as he leaned his forehead to hers. I notice everything about you, Etta. The way you want to please everyone else, to the detriment of your happiness. The way you tore yourself inside with guilt over Baxter. The way you tore up your dress and stripped off your stockings to help a child that isn't yours. Ah, but he is mine, she whispered. He's my family. She heard the click of his swallow, felt his breath graze her cheek. He called me Aunt Etta. He told me that you're taking him to the store tomorrow to buy candy. She snuffled out a laugh. I promised him candy when he's better. He held her gaze as his expression sobered. I stood over there, watching you through the dark, trying to work out a way to keep you here. I was so caught up in jealous anger yesterday. I should have given you the chance to explain. I should have trusted you. Her fingers threaded into his hair at the nape of his neck. I didn't give you a reason to trust me. I will never do that again. Is he going to take no for an answer? He cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed the corner of her lips, and her eyes drifted closed as sensation plumed inside her. Who? This Samuel person? She stood up on tiptoes, aligned her body to his, and pulled his head towards hers. She yearned for him, for his touch. She wanted to be able to touch him freely like this forever. Who? Never mind, he growled and met her mouth with his. The kiss exploded all around them as her love swelled in her chest. He wrapped his arms around her, enveloping her in him, in love, and she gave herself fully to her husband. The end.